I discovered my fiancé was only marrying me to clear his financial troubles. So I walked down the aisle, with a special guest who had a perfectly legal surprise waiting just for him. I still remember the night he proposed. The way the candlelight flickered across the rooftop terrace, casting a golden hue on the elegant dinner he had arranged. The city skyline stretched out behind him, the distant hum of traffic merging with the soft melody of a live violinist. It felt surreal, like a scene from a romance movie. "Marry me," he had said, his voice steady yet laced with what I had mistaken for nervous anticipation. His hands, warm and confident, held mine as he slipped a sparkling ring onto my finger. I should have noticed the signs even then. The way he glanced around, almost as if making sure we had an audience. The urgency in his proposal, as though waiting another month, another week, was out of the question. But love, as they say, has a way of painting over cracks, making flaws appear as charming quirks. I had said yes without hesitation. The weeks that followed were filled with nothing but bliss. Wedding planning, cake tastings, floral arrangements. It all blended together in a whirlwind of excitement. Friends and family gushed over how lucky I was to have found someone as charming, as devoted, as utterly perfect as him. And I had believed them. Looking back, I realize now how expertly he had played his role. He was attentive, remembering every little detail I mentioned in passing. He knew my coffee order by heart, surprised me with handwritten notes, and always seemed to be exactly what I needed. Supportive when I was stressed, affectionate when I was feeling distant. But there were moments, fleeting as they were, where doubt crept in. Like the time he had taken an urgent phone call and had stepped away so quickly, I barely caught the shift in his expression. Or the time I had suggested a prenuptial agreement, a mere formality, and his response had been far from what I had expected. "A prenup?" He had laughed, but there was something tight about his smile. "You think I'm marrying you for your assets?" It had been a joke, of course. Or so I had thought. I had brushed it off, convinced myself that love didn't require such things. After all, we were a team. Two people stepping into a future together. But love shouldn't come with secrets. The first real crack in the illusion appeared at an upscale charity gala we attended together. It was a dazzling event, filled with business tycoons, socialites, and investors discussing opportunities that stretched across continents. I had stepped away to greet an acquaintance when I overheard a snippet of a hushed conversation. "He's in deep. If he doesn't find a way to settle soon, it's over." I turned just enough to see my fiancé's face, tension carved into every feature. He wasn't the one speaking, but he was listening, nodding stiffly as an older man patted his shoulder in a way that felt more like a warning than reassurance. That night he was different. Distracted, restless. He barely touched his drink, his fingers tapping against the table as though his mind was elsewhere. "What's wrong?" I had asked, but his smile was back in place before I could press further. "Just work things," he had said, kissing my temple. "Nothing to worry about." And I had let it go. Weeks passed and the wedding countdown ticked closer. Every little doubt I had buried beneath excitement, beneath love, began to resurface. He had always been ambitious, yes, but suddenly his interest in our financial matters had grown more specific. "How much is your trust fund worth again? You never told me who manages your accounts. Do you think merging our finances after marriage would be easier?" It was subtle at first, wrapped in innocent curiosity. But each time there was a weight behind his words, a carefully hidden urgency. And then, there were the moments where I would catch him lost in thought, staring at his phone for long stretches, typing out messages before deleting them entirely. One evening he had excused himself abruptly from a dinner with my parents, stepping outside to take a call. He had left his phone on the table, the screen lighting up with a message I wasn't meant to see. "I need more time. I'll have access to everything soon." My stomach had tightened, my mind racing through possibilities. Who was he talking to? And what exactly was he gaining access to? I had meant to ask him, but I couldn't. Not without proof, not without knowing for sure. So I had done the one thing I never thought I'd have to do in a relationship built on trust. I started looking for answers myself. One evening while he was in the shower, I sat on the couch in his apartment, absently scrolling through emails on my phone. That's when his laptop screen flickered to life. A notification popping up in the corner. "Finalizing the plan. Her assets will be yours soon." My breath caught in my throat. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I shouldn't. I should. I clicked. The email opened, revealing an entire conversation spanning weeks. My fiancé had been working with a lawyer, crafting a way to legally bind my assets to him the moment we were married. A carefully structured agreement, one that would ensure my inheritance, my investments, and every account in my name would be easily accessible to him. The words blurred together as I scrolled. And then there was another name. A man I didn't recognize. The email thread continued, detailing how my fiancé had borrowed money from an investor in New York. Large sums promising huge returns. But he had failed. The deal had collapsed and now he was being pursued for the debt he had no way of repaying. Unless he married into wealth. Unless he married me. I sat frozen, my pulse pounding in my ears. The world around me felt suddenly different. Like I had stepped into a reality where everything I believed was a carefully crafted lie. I thought of every moment, every conversation, every smile he had ever given me. Had any of it been real? Or had I simply been a means to an end? A tool to clear his financial ruin? Anger rose, sharp and undeniable. But beneath it something else emerged, resolve. I could have confronted him then and there. I could have screamed, demanded explanations, watched as he fumbled for excuses. But that would be too easy. He had played a game. Now it was my turn. And I was going to make sure he never saw it coming. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The email's words were burned into my mind, each sentence confirming what my instincts had been whispering for weeks. My fiancé was orchestrating a calculated deception, one designed to strip me of everything the moment we exchanged vows. And worse, he wasn't just manipulating me, he was doing it out of sheer desperation. A man from New York, a name unfamiliar yet ominous, was closing in on him. A man who had invested in him, believing in his false promises of success, only to be left chasing a shadow. My fiancé had taken the money, failed spectacularly, and now he was scrambling for an escape. That escape was me. A hollow laugh built in my chest, but I swallowed it down. This wasn't the time for emotion. This was the time for strategy. I reached for my phone, quickly taking screenshots of the emails and forwarding them to myself. If he was willing to deceive me this thoroughly, I needed every ounce of leverage I could gather. My hands trembled slightly as I locked his laptop and placed it back exactly as I had found it. He couldn't know I had seen anything, not yet. The sound of water stopped. I straightened immediately, forcing my breath to even out as I moved back to the couch, pretending to scroll through social media as if my entire world hadn't just shifted. A moment later he emerged from the bathroom, a towel draped over his shoulders, his usual easy smile in place. "Missed me?" he teased, leaning down to press a kiss to my temple. I looked up, my own smile automatic, rehearsed, flawless. Always. A game of pretend. The next few days passed in excruciating slow motion. I went through the motions, finalizing wedding plans, trying on my dress, attending tastings and fittings, all while carrying the weight of a secret that threatened to crush me. He was none the wiser. If anything, he seemed more relaxed than ever, likely believing that his future was secured. But every conversation, every lingering touch, every whispered "I love you" now felt like an elaborate act. A performance meant to ensure his payday. I started watching him differently. Not as my fiancé, not as the man I once loved, but as an opponent in a high-stakes game. And while he may have been playing for my money, my assets, my security, I was playing for something far greater. Justice. But first I needed confirmation. I began my quiet investigation, tracing the breadcrumbs his emails had left behind. I started with the mystery man from New York. His name was listed in the emails, and with a little digging I uncovered enough to piece together the story. He was an investor. One with a strong reputation, known for funding rising entrepreneurs. My fiancé had been one of those ventures, convincing the investor to back a business deal that had collapsed spectacularly. The more I learned, the clearer the picture became. The business had never been sustainable. It had been a glorified attempt to flip funds, a reckless gamble on an industry he knew nothing about. The investor had warned him. But my fiancé had been overconfident, refusing to listen, burning through the money faster than he could recover it. When the business failed, he disappeared. No repayment plan, no accountability, just radio silence. He'll know. I found news articles about the investor's past dealings, including legal disputes with previous business partners who had crossed him. This wasn't just someone sending empty threats. This was a man who made sure he got what was owed. And now he was after my fiancé. Good. The last puzzle piece fell into place on an ordinary afternoon, just a few days before the wedding. We were having coffee together, sitting in the corner of a quiet cafe. He was texting, his attention flickering between his phone and our conversation, as though managing multiple crises at once. I watched as he typed, deleted, typed again. Finally, I took a breath and leaned in slightly. "What's got you so distracted?" I asked, keeping my tone light, teasing. "Wedding stress." He smiled, but it was tight. "Something like that. Just making sure everything is in place." "Everything?" I tilted my head, feigning curiosity. "Like what?" He hesitated, only for a fraction of a second, but I caught it. "Just last-minute logistics. Bank stuff." "Bank stuff." I took a sip of my coffee, my expression unreadable. He didn't elaborate. Because he couldn't. Because he was lying. And I was done pretending not to see it. That night, as he slept beside me, I made my move. I had already gathered every document, every screenshot, every piece of evidence that confirmed his intentions. Now I needed to set the stage for his downfall. I reached for my phone and made the call that would change everything. The New York investor picked up on the second ring. "This is unexpected," he said, his voice sharp and controlled. I took a breath. "I have information about the man you're looking for." There was a pause. And then the shift, a quiet intensity settling over the conversation. "I'm listening." The next 24 hours were a blur of strategic phone calls and legal consultations. The investor and I worked out an agreement. He had evidence of financial misconduct, but what he lacked was a way to expose it publicly in a way that ensured consequences. That's where I came in. The wedding was the perfect setting. A room full of witnesses. Cameras rolling. A stage built for a grand reveal. "I want to do it at the ceremony," I told him. There was a brief silence before he chuckled. "You're bolder than I expected." I smiled, but there was no warmth behind it. I learned from the best. The night before the wedding, my fiancé pulled me close, whispering about how excited he was for our future. I let him hold me. Let him press a kiss against my forehead. Let him believe he had already won. Because by this time tomorrow he wouldn't have a future left to look forward to. I lay still, feeling the slow rise and fall of his breathing beside me, his arm draped carelessly over my waist. The warmth of his touch, once comforting, now felt suffocating. I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing through every meticulous detail of the plan. He thought he had won. He believed tomorrow would mark the beginning of his comfortable, debt-free life, wrapped neatly in the security of my name, my assets, my trust. He had no idea that by this time tomorrow his entire world would unravel. I closed my eyes, willing myself to relax, to play my role one last time. He shifted beside me, murmuring in his sleep, his breath brushing against my skin. I forced my body to remain still, matching the rhythm of deep, even breathing, letting him believe I was lost in peaceful slumber. If he had even the slightest inkling of what was about to happen, he would run. But he wouldn't. Not yet. Not when he believed he was so close to securing everything he wanted. The morning sun broke through the curtains, casting a soft glow over the room. His hand traced lazy circles over my back before he kissed my shoulder. "It's almost time," he whispered, his voice thick with sleep. "I can't wait to finally call you my wife." I turned toward him, eyes filled with feigned affection, and smiled. "Me too." The morning was a blur of preparations. My dress was fitted perfectly, the intricate lace draping elegantly over my frame. The makeup artist worked in quiet efficiency, soft curls falling over my shoulders as I sat in the mirror, watching my reflection. My heart should have been racing, my hands trembling, but I felt nothing. Just cold, unwavering focus. Outside, guests were arriving, their laughter and conversation filtering through the open windows. The grand venue, adorned with delicate flowers and golden lights, stood as a testament to the illusion he had so carefully crafted. He had planned every detail to perfection, ensuring it would be an event people would talk about for years. And they would. Just not for the reasons he had imagined. The ceremony was set outdoors, overlooking a pristine lake. Rows of chairs lined the aisle, guests dressed in their finest attire, murmuring in admiration. At the altar he stood tall, exuding confidence, his suit pressed to perfection, a picture of the devoted groom. His gaze scanned the crowd, nodding at familiar faces, his chest swelling with pride. The music swelled, signaling my entrance. I inhaled slowly, stepping forward, the sound of my heels tapping against the marble floor echoing in my ears. All eyes turned toward me, admiration shining in their faces, unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. My hands remained steady as I walked, my expression unreadable. He smiled as I neared, reaching out for my hand as if claiming victory. And then I spoke. "I have a surprise for you." A flicker of confusion crossed his face, quickly masked by amusement. "A surprise?" I nodded, turning slightly as the crowd murmured in curiosity. From the far end of the aisle, a man stepped forward, dressed in a crisp suit, his gaze locked on the groom. The whispers grew louder, confusion spreading through the crowd as recognition dawned on my fiancé's face. His body tensed, his hand dropping from mine, a shadow of panic flickering across his carefully composed features. "Meet your guest," I continued, my voice carrying through the hushed silence. "The one who has been waiting a long time to see you." The man stopped a few feet away, sliding his hands into his pockets with deliberate ease. "We finally meet again," he said, his voice calm but laced with something undeniable. My fiancé took a step back. "What is this?" His voice wavered slightly, his eyes darting toward me, searching for an explanation, an escape. I tilted my head, feigning innocence. "Oh, just someone who has been looking for you. I figured since we're starting a life together, there shouldn't be any secrets." The businessman reached into his jacket, pulling out a neatly folded document and holding it up. "I believe you owe me something," he said. "And I think your lovely fiancé has already uncovered everything." The tension was suffocating. Guests exchanged looks of confusion, whispering amongst themselves. My fiancé's hands clenched into fists at his sides, his carefully curated world crumbling before his eyes. "You think you can do this here?" he hissed, his voice low but shaking with barely concealed panic. I met his gaze, holding it steadily. "I can." And I just did. His breathing turned ragged, his composure slipping. "This isn't the place." "Isn't it?" I interrupted, my voice steady. "You wanted a perfect wedding, didn't you? A moment for everyone to see the life you were about to build? Well, here it is. Everyone gets to witness the truth now." The businessman unfolded the papers, skimming over them before looking up. "We can either handle this quietly or I can involve the legal system. Either way, this conversation doesn't end here." The color drained from my fiancé's face. He looked around, his confidence shattered, his mind scrambling for an escape. But there was none. His lies had been stitched too tightly into this moment, and now, under the weight of reality, they were unraveling. I took a step forward, my voice dropping so only he could hear. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out? That I would just sign away everything without question?" His eyes flickered with something desperate, something unspoken, but I had no interest in hearing his excuses. I turned away, reaching for the ring on my finger, sliding it off effortlessly. Holding it between my fingers, I examined it for a moment before extending my hand. "This doesn't belong to me anymore," I said, my voice carrying through the still air. He didn't move. Didn't reach for it. So I let it fall. The small metallic sound echoed like a final note in a tragic symphony. A murmur spread through the guests, the reality of the situation finally sinking in. The event that was supposed to be the grand celebration of love had turned into something else entirely, something far more unforgettable. I turned to leave, stepping away from the altar, my heart light for the first time in weeks. The air felt different, crisp with the weight of justice. I walked past the rows of stunned guests, past the flowers and golden lights that no longer held any meaning. And as I reached the doors leading away from the spectacle, I glanced back one last time. He stood frozen, surrounded by everything he had built on lies, watching as it collapsed around him. And then I walked away, never looking back. The moment I stepped outside, the weight in my chest lifted, replaced by something lighter, something almost exhilarating. The air felt different, charged with the energy of a decision well made. Behind me, the murmur of stunned guests and the echo of my fiancé's unraveling humiliation carried through the grand doors of the venue. His world had just collapsed, but mine was just beginning again. I walked down the marble steps without looking back, feeling the sun warm my skin as the last remnants of my so-called perfect wedding faded behind me. A black sedan was parked near the entrance, and as I approached, the door opened with smooth precision. The businessman from New York sat inside, watching me with the quiet patience of a man who had waited a long time for this day. I slid into the seat beside him, closing the door firmly behind me. The hum of the car's engine was a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding inside. I could picture my ex-fiancé now, his face pale, hands shaking, eyes darting around for a way out that didn't exist. He had spent months crafting a web of lies, only to be ensnared by it himself. The businessman studied me for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, with a knowing nod, he reached into the leather briefcase beside him and pulled out a neatly organized stack of papers. "It's done," he said, his voice steady. "The legal case is moving forward. His assets will be frozen and the courts will decide the rest." I exhaled slowly, letting the reality sink in. He had no escape now. Not only was his financial ruin inevitable, but his reputation, the one thing he valued above all, was in shambles. The whispers would spread. Business associates would distance themselves. His name would become synonymous with deception. I turned to the businessman, meeting his gaze with quiet gratitude. "Thank you for trusting me with this," I said. "I know this could have played out differently." He smirked, shaking his head. "I'll admit, I didn't expect you to go through with it in such a spectacular way." He leaned back, crossing one leg over the other. "Most people in your position would have walked away quietly, maybe handled things in court. But you..." He chuckled. "You gave him a downfall no one will forget." I smiled faintly, though there was no real amusement in it. "He played me for a fool. I wanted him to feel that same powerlessness." The businessman nodded, as if he understood perfectly. "Well, if it's any consolation, I doubt he'll recover from this anytime soon." He handed me another document, this one a letter of formal notification. "Once this is filed, the legal process will be out of our hands. But I don't think you'll need to worry. He doesn't have much left to fight with." I took the papers, my fingers brushing over the embossed letterhead. It was poetic in a way. He had tried so desperately to claim my future as his own, only to lose everything in return. The car pulled away from the venue, merging into the quiet streets beyond. The weight on my shoulders lessened with every passing second. I had walked into that wedding prepared for war, and I had walked out victorious. There was no sadness, no second-guessing. Just a profound sense of closure. As the city passed by in a blur outside the window, I let my thoughts drift back to how it had all begun. The moments I had ignored, the red flags disguised as charm, the manipulation hidden beneath whispered promises. It was astounding how much a person could overlook in the name of love. He had been so confident, so sure that I would never suspect him. But he had underestimated me. That was his fatal flaw. The businessman tapped his fingers against the armrest, breaking the silence. "So what's next for you?" I glanced at him, considering the question. For so long, my life had been tangled up in him, in wedding plans, in the illusion of a future that no longer existed. But that was over now. I was free in a way I hadn't been in months, maybe years. "I start fresh," I said finally. "And I make sure no one ever tries to take advantage of me again." He nodded approvingly. "Smart." He glanced out the window, then back at me. "You know, if you ever need connections in the business world, I know people who could help. You're sharp. I imagine you'd do well in this game if you ever decided to step into it." I smiled, shaking my head. "I think I've had enough games for a while." The car slowed at an intersection and I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the glass. I looked the same, yet entirely different. The girl who had walked into that wedding in a white dress, prepared to pledge her life to a man who had deceived her, no longer existed. In her place was someone stronger. Someone who had taken back control. I turned back to the businessman. "But I appreciate the offer." He smirked. "Keep my number. You never know when you might need a friend in high places." The car pulled up to my building and the driver stepped out to open my door. I gathered the documents, smoothing out my dress before stepping onto the sidewalk. The businessman didn't say anything as I turned to leave, but there was something in his gaze. Approval, perhaps. Or maybe just understanding. I walked inside without looking back. Upstairs, my apartment was exactly as I had left it. Untouched. Peaceful. I slipped off my heels, my fingers brushing against the engagement ring still sitting in my palm. I stared at it for a long moment before walking to the window, where the city stretched out before me. Then, without hesitation, I placed the ring on the table and turned away. It no longer belonged to me. The chapter was closed. The game was over. And for the first time in a long time I was truly free. I stood at the window, watching the city pulse with life beneath me, a sharp contrast to the eerie calm settling over my thoughts. The engagement ring lay on the table, a silent testament to the illusion that had once been my future. It no longer held meaning, just a symbol of a lie expertly woven by the man I had nearly married. But today the lie would collapse. The morning air was crisp as I stepped outside, the city buzzing around me as if unaware of the storm brewing just beneath its surface. The weight of my gown draped elegantly over my shoulders, its white silk a contradiction to the darkness of my intent. The wedding venue loomed ahead, adorned in flowers and soft golden light, as if preparing for a fairy tale. But this wasn't a love story. I walked through the grand entrance, the hum of conversations floating through the air, laughter mixing with the clinking of glasses. Familiar faces turned toward me, smiles stretching across lips, eyes gleaming with excitement. They saw a bride radiant and poised, ready to pledge forever. None of them knew the truth hidden behind my practiced expression. At the altar he stood tall, his suit pressed to perfection, a confident smile playing on his lips. He thought he had won. He believed he had played me so well that I was walking toward him willingly, unaware of his deception. He was about to learn how wrong he was. The music swelled, filling the space with an almost cinematic grandeur as I moved forward. My hands remained steady, my steps measured. He reached for my hand, his fingers warm against mine, but I didn't squeeze back. His brow furrowed slightly, but the moment passed quickly as he turned toward the officiant, eager to seal the deal he had so carefully orchestrated. Just as the officiant began to speak, I pulled my hand away. A murmur rippled through the guests, confusion flickering across my fiancé's face. I turned slightly, my gaze locking onto a figure at the far end of the aisle. The businessman from New York stepped forward, his movements deliberate, his expression unreadable. The whispers grew louder. My fiancé stiffened beside me, the confidence in his posture faltering. "Before we begin," I said, my voice carrying through the room, clear and unwavering, "there's someone here who has been waiting a long time to see you." The businessman stopped a few feet away, sliding his hands into his pockets, his presence exuding quiet authority. He didn't need to speak for the tension to thicken. My fiancé inhaled sharply, his jaw tightening, realization hitting him like a crashing wave. I tilted my head slightly, watching as the color drained from his face. "You didn't think I'd find out, did you?" A hush fell over the room, all eyes bouncing between us, the festive atmosphere morphing into something colder, something far more unsettling. The businessman reached into his jacket and retrieved a folder, flipping it open with an almost lazy precision. "You disappeared on me," he said, his tone casual, almost amused. "Vanished into thin air, thinking you could escape what you owed." He turned a page, then glanced up. "But it looks like you found another solution, didn't you?" My fiancé swallowed hard, his body tense. "This isn't the time." I stepped forward, cutting him off. "Isn't it?" I challenged, my voice unwavering. "You planned every detail of this day. Every guest, every moment. Why not add one more unexpected twist?" His gaze darted between me and the businessman, his mind scrambling for a way out. But there was none. The businessman held up the documents. Shady business dealings, fabricated financial reports, debts so high you needed a convenient way to wipe them clean. He paused, smirking. "And what better way than marrying into money?" The gasps that followed were sharp, the weight of the revelation crashing through the room like a breaking tide. My fiancé turned toward me, desperation creeping into his expression. "This isn't what you think," he started, his voice lower, strained. I arched a brow. "Oh. Then what is it?" He opened his mouth, but no words came. I reached into my gown's hidden pocket, retrieving my phone. With a tap, I projected the email thread onto the venue's large digital screen. Messages appeared in sharp contrast against the elegant backdrop, damning evidence for everyone to see. "Finalizing the plan, her assets will be yours soon. You still owe me. Don't think I've forgotten. Pay up soon or things get messy. 1 year of marriage and I'll be free. Then I can leave and keep everything." The crowd's reaction was instant. Gasps, murmurs, heads shaking in disbelief. His family looked horrified, guests exchanged looks of shock, and his business associates leaned in, whispering among themselves. His mask shattered. His carefully constructed world unraveled before his eyes, and I watched as panic settled into every inch of his frame. You did this, he hissed, stepping closer, his voice barely audible beneath the rising tension in the room. I tilted my head, amusement flickering in my gaze. No, I corrected, my voice smooth, calm. You did this. I just made sure everyone saw it. The businessman took a step forward, holding out a separate document. This, he said, waving the paper, is a legal notice. We're moving forward with the case. Your accounts will be frozen, your assets under scrutiny. He smirked. I imagine this isn't quite the wedding gift you were expecting. My fiancé's hands clenched into fists, his breath coming in sharp, shallow inhales. The weight of the moment pressed down on him, suffocating, inescapable. He had played his game well. But I had played better. The officiant, now visibly uncomfortable, cleared his throat. Perhaps we should. There's nothing more to say, I interrupted. I reached for the engagement ring, sliding it off my finger with ease. Holding it between my fingers, I examined it for a brief moment before extending my hand toward him. This belongs to you, I said, my voice carrying through the stunned silence. He didn't reach for it. Didn't move. So I let it fall. The soft clink as it hit the marble floor was deafening. I turned toward the crowd, exhaling slowly. Enjoy the rest of your evening, I said, my tone light, almost amused. I certainly will. With that I walked away. Past the altar, past the stunned guests, past the life I had almost been trapped in. The doors swung open as I stepped into the cool evening air, the weight that had once clung to my chest lifting entirely. Behind me, the whispers turned into murmurs, the murmurs into shocked conversations. He was left standing alone at the altar, surrounded by the ruins of his own making. I didn't look back. Not once. I stepped outside, the cool evening air wrapping around me like a long-awaited embrace. The weight that had pressed against my chest for weeks had lifted, replaced by a steady calmness I hadn't felt in a long time. Behind me, the grand doors of the wedding venue remained open, the golden glow of chandeliers spilling onto the marble steps. The whispers had already begun, rippling through the crowd like waves after a storm, each guest trying to piece together what had just unfolded before them. I took a deep breath, feeling the tension in my shoulders dissolve. It was over. The illusion had shattered, and with it so had his carefully constructed world. But I wasn't done yet. The businessman stepped beside me, adjusting his cuffs as he watched the scene inside. I have to admit, he said, his voice etched with amusement, you have a flair for the dramatic. I smirked, crossing my arms as I glanced back at the chaos I had left behind. He deserved nothing less. Inside, my ex-fiancé still stood near the altar, frozen in place. His eyes darted between his family, his business associates, and the guests, desperately trying to salvage whatever dignity remained. But there was none. The moment the emails had flashed across the venue's screens, the whispers had turned to gasps, and those gasps had become murmurs of disbelief. His parents were the first to react. His mother, once so enamored with the idea of me joining their family, now looked at him with open disappointment. His father stood rigid, jaw clenched, exchanging quiet but sharp words with him, his disapproval evident even from where I stood. His friends, the ones who had always laughed at his charm and wit, had shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some already turning away, pretending they hadn't been part of the spectacle at all. But it was the investors, his business associates, who truly sealed his fate. They weren't whispering. They weren't murmuring. They were watching him with the kind of quiet intensity that sent chills down a person's spine. The kind that meant the calculations had already begun, the numbers running in their heads. He had spent years convincing them that he was a man of strategy, of intelligence, of careful planning. Now they had seen the truth for themselves. He wasn't strategic. He wasn't careful. He was reckless. And no one invested in recklessness. I saw the exact moment it hit him. His breathing quickened, his hands twitched, his mind scrambling for an exit, for something, anything, to salvage the situation. But there was nothing left to hold on to. The weight of his actions had collapsed in on itself, leaving him standing in the wreckage. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. He turned then, eyes scanning the room, searching for me. A flicker of something desperate crossed his expression. I held my ground, my hands steady at my sides as he stepped forward, as if to close the space between us, to fix what had already broken beyond repair. He opened his mouth, but before he could say anything, the businessman beside me spoke, his voice cutting through the thick silence. Whatever you're about to say, I wouldn't waste your breath. My ex-fiancé froze, his gaze snapping to the man who had up until now been a ghost from his past. The businessman smirked slightly, his posture relaxed but his presence imposing. I think we've heard enough from you for one night, don't you? My ex-fiancé's hands clenched into fists. This isn't your business. It became my business the moment you took my money and ran. The businessman interrupted smoothly, his voice calm, measured. But I have to give you credit. The wedding con was a creative touch. Too bad you didn't count on her being smarter than you. The words hit like a slap, the final nail in the coffin of his already shattered pride. The guests, now silent, waited for his response, but none came. What could he say? That he hadn't meant for this to happen? That he had been caught off guard? There were no explanations left, no justifications strong enough to erase what had been exposed tonight. For the first time he truly looked cornered. The businessman sighed, glancing at me. Well, I think that about covers everything, doesn't it? I nodded, a small smile tugging at my lips. I'd say so. Without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving my ex-fiancé standing alone in the center of the room, surrounded by people who now knew exactly who he was. I took a step forward, closing the remaining distance between us, my voice low enough that only he could hear. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? His jaw tightened, his eyes burning with a mix of emotions, anger, regret, humiliation. But there was no apology in them, just frustration that he had lost. I tilted my head slightly. Enjoy the rest of your evening, I said softly, my tone laced with finality. And then I walked away. I could feel his gaze burning into my back, could hear the rustling of movement behind me as guests murmured amongst themselves. But I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. The damage was done. As I stepped out into the night once more, the cool breeze washing over me, I finally allowed myself to exhale. The tension, the uncertainty, the weight of the betrayal, it all melted away. This was closure. This was justice. The businessman waiting by his car gave me a nod of approval. You handled that well. I smirked. I had a good teacher. He chuckled, opening the door to his car. Something tells me you won't be needing my lessons anymore. I watched as he drove off, the tail lights disappearing into the distance. The city stretched out before me, alive with possibilities, untethered from the past that had once held me captive. I reached into my pocket, my fingers brushing against the engagement ring one last time before I slipped it onto the ledge of a nearby fountain. It caught the light for a brief moment before vanishing beneath the water's surface, lost to the city, to time, to the memories that no longer had a hold on me. And as I walked away, leaving it all behind, I knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. The sound of the fountain's gentle trickle faded behind me as I walked away, my steps lighter than they had been in months. The engagement ring was gone, lost beneath the rippling water, along with every illusion I had once clung to. There was nothing left tying me to him, except the final piece of the plan I had set in motion. The legal case. The businessman had already left, but his presence still lingered in the back of my mind. His calm confidence, his understanding nod, the satisfaction in his smirk when he saw my ex-fiancé's downfall play out in front of everyone. I had done something no lawsuit alone could have accomplished. I had exposed him. Publicly. Irrefutably. Now the world knew exactly who he was, and that knowledge was far more damaging than any legal document could ever be. But this wasn't over. I reached into my clutch, pulling out my phone as I made my way toward the waiting car. A few missed calls blinked on the screen, most from numbers I recognized, former friends, distant relatives, people who had been at the wedding and were now desperate for details. I ignored them. There was only one call I needed to make. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the number the businessman had given me earlier. The attorney handling the case. I pressed the call button and lifted the phone to my ear. It rang twice before a smooth, professional voice answered. Miss Carter. I was expecting your call. I slid into the back seat of the car, exhaling slowly. I assume everything is in place? It is. The lawsuit has been formally filed as of an hour ago. Your ex-fiancé's financial records will be frozen pending investigation. There's already been movement. One of his business partners pulled out of a pending deal upon hearing the news. I let my head rest against the seat, staring out at the city lights as they blurred past the window. He had built his entire life on charm, on trust, on the belief that people wouldn't dig too deep. But now the people he had counted on were turning away one by one. What about his personal accounts? I asked. The attorney hesitated. Those will be audited as well, but given that a significant portion of his assets were tied up in investments, the damage has already been done. If he was hoping to use your financial resources as a safety net, well, that option is no longer available. A faint smile tugged at my lips. Good. I should warn you, the attorney continued, his tone shifting slightly. He's not going to go down quietly. He'll fight this. I closed my eyes, considering the words. Of course he would fight. He wasn't the type to accept defeat even when it was staring him in the face. He would scramble, make calls, try to salvage whatever reputation he could still cling to. But it wouldn't matter. The damage was irreversible. Let him, I said finally. The more he fights, the more attention he brings to himself. And the more attention he gets, the faster his empire collapses. There was a brief pause on the other end, then a quiet chuckle. Remind me never to end up on your bad side, Miss Carter. I smirked. Noted. The call ended and I let the phone rest in my lap. Outside, the car continued weaving through the streets, carrying me further away from the wreckage I had left behind. I imagined him now, back at the venue, his hands gripping his phone, his mind racing through possible escape routes. But there were none. The lawsuits would drag him through months, maybe years of financial turmoil. His investors had already started pulling out, and once word spread, any remaining business ties he had would vanish. He would be left with nothing but the consequences of his own choices. I didn't need to watch it happen. I had done what I came to do. The car slowed as we reached my apartment building. I stepped out, my heels clicking softly against the pavement. The doorman nodded in greeting, holding the door open as I walked inside. Everything was exactly as I had left it, untouched, quiet, mine. I made my way up to my floor, slipping off my shoes as I stepped into my living room. The city stretched out beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, vast and endless. It was strange how different the world looked when you no longer carried the weight of someone else's deception. My phone buzzed again. Another call. I glanced down. His name flashed across the screen. For a moment I simply stared at it, at the name that had once meant so much, at the person I had nearly given my future to. Then I let it ring. Eventually it stopped, replaced by a voicemail notification. I didn't listen to it. I didn't need to. I already knew what it would say. Excuses, explanations, desperate attempts to rewrite history. But history had already been written and I had no interest in revising it. I placed the phone face down on the table, exhaling slowly. The game was over. And I had won. I stared at my phone, his name still lingering on the screen long after it had stopped ringing. The voicemail sat unopened, a silent plea from the man who had once convinced me that our future was built on love. But love had never been part of his plan. Only deception, only strategy. Now, the very foundation he had tried to manipulate had crumbled beneath him, and he was reaching for anything to stop the inevitable fall. I wasn't going to catch him. The city outside my window stretched endlessly into the night, the distant hum of life moving forward, uncaring of the spectacle that had just played out. I let the thought settle over me, how insignificant he had now become in the grand scheme of things. His calls, his excuses, his regret, if there even was any, no longer mattered. With a quiet exhale I reached for my phone, deleted the voicemail without listening to it, and blocked his number. There was nothing left for him to say that I needed to hear. I turned away from the window, letting the silence of my apartment wrap around me. It was strange, this quiet. For so long my mind had been a storm filled with suspicion, heartbreak, anger, and strategy. Now there was only stillness. Not emptiness, not loss, just the space to breathe again. The next morning the world had already moved on. I stepped into a cafe near my apartment, the scent of fresh coffee curling through the air as I waited in line. A couple stood ahead of me, laughing softly, hands intertwined, lost in their own world. I watched them for a moment, not with bitterness but with a quiet understanding. Once I had believed in a love like that. Now I simply knew better. The barista handed me my coffee, and as I turned, I caught a glimpse of a familiar face on one of the cafe's mounted televisions. A news segment played, the headline running in bold letters across the screen. Businessman faces legal trouble following public financial exposure at wedding event. I took a sip of my coffee, allowing the warmth to spread through me as I watched the screen. There he was, my ex-fiancé, his image frozen mid-stride as reporters crowded around him outside a courthouse. His jaw was clenched, his posture stiff, every ounce of his once effortless charm now strained beneath the weight of scrutiny. A news anchor spoke over the footage, summarizing the case that had erupted in the aftermath of the wedding. Investors had begun pulling out, partnerships were dissolving, and legal battles were now imminent. His carefully built empire, built on charm, lies, and borrowed time, was collapsing faster than he could salvage it. I wondered how it felt to have the world see him for who he truly was. The screen switched to an interview clip, one of his former business partners speaking with calculated professionalism. "Trust is everything in business," the man said, his tone cold. "And once it's broken, there's no rebuilding it." I smiled slightly, turning away from the screen. The final blow had landed. I walked out of the cafe, stepping into the bright morning light, the weight of the past officially behind me. There was no need to dwell on his downfall. I had done what I needed to do, and I was free. I stepped onto the sidewalk, the warmth of the morning sun kissing my skin as the world bustled around me. The air smelled fresh, untouched by the chaos I had left behind. People moved past, engaged in their own lives, oblivious to the storm that had passed through mine. It was over. For the first time in what felt like forever, there were no schemes to unravel, no betrayals to unearth, no plans to execute. Just silence. Peace. A new beginning waiting to unfold. I made my way through the city streets, each step lighter than the last. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind, a carefully orchestrated performance where every move had to be calculated. But now I had nothing left to plan. Nothing left to fight for. I had won. My ex-fiancé was exactly where he deserved to be, trapped in the mess he had created. His face was everywhere. Every news outlet had picked up the story, his once polished image now stained beyond repair. Investors had withdrawn their support, lawsuits were piling up, and his carefully crafted empire was crumbling beneath him. Me. I was finally free of him. As I turned the corner onto a quieter street, my phone buzzed in my pocket. For a brief second, I thought of ignoring it, assuming it was another message from someone wanting details about the wedding disaster. But when I glanced at the screen, a familiar number flashed. A number I hadn't expected to see again. The businessman. I hesitated before answering. "Didn't think I'd be hearing from you again." A quiet chuckle came through the line. "I wanted to make sure you saw the news." I glanced at a passing newsstand, my ex's face plastered across the front page. The headline read, "Prominent businessman faces financial collapse after public exposure." "I saw," I said, continuing to walk. "He's done." "He is." Pause. "You really finished him off." I let the words settle. I had expected satisfaction. Maybe even a rush of victory. But all I felt was certainty. This was the ending he had earned, the consequences of every lie, every manipulation, every attempt to take what wasn't his. "So," I said, stopping at a crosswalk. "Why the call?" There was a slight hesitation on the other end before he spoke again. "I've been in this industry long enough to know when I see someone with potential." I raised an eyebrow. "Potential for what?" "For handling business," he said simply. "You didn't just expose him, you outplayed him. You knew when to strike, when to wait, and when to make your move. That's not something everyone can do." I remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "I have connections," he said. "People who could use someone with your instincts. If you're interested." I smiled to myself, amused by the unexpected turn. "Are you offering me a job?" "Let's call it an opportunity," he replied smoothly. "You're smart, and more importantly, you're ruthless when you need to be. That's valuable." I thought about it for a moment, the possibilities stretching out in front of me like an open road. I had spent months being the target of someone else's ambition. Maybe it was time to start carving my own path. "I'll think about it," I said finally. "Do that," he said. "And if you ever decide you're ready, you know where to find me." The call ended, leaving me standing at the edge of a new beginning. I took a deep breath, letting the past fade behind me as I stepped forward. There was no rush to decide. No urgency pressing against my thoughts. For now, all that mattered was this moment. I had walked through the fire and emerged stronger. And for the first time in a long time, the future was entirely mine. While I was in a coma, my husband and mother-in-law stole my wallet. "She won't need it where she's going," they chuckled, spending $150,000 on a luxury cruise. When the nurse handed me the receipts, I smiled. then transferred every penny from their secret accounts to charities while they were still at sea. She won't need it where she's going. Those were the first words I heard as consciousness flickered back like a faulty light bulb. My husband Mark's voice, followed by his mother Eleanor's distinctive cackle. Their conversation faded as darkness swallowed me again. When my eyes finally opened, the hospital room's fluorescent lights stabbed my retinas like needles. My throat felt like sandpaper, my limbs as heavy as concrete. The clock on the wall read 3:17 p.m. But what day? What month? The window showed leaves falling. Wasn't it spring when I last remembered being awake? I tried to speak, producing only a raspy whimper that caught the attention of a nurse checking the monitors beside my bed. Her ID badge read Donna. Her eyes widened as she noticed mine were open. "Mrs. Carter? Can you hear me?" Her gentle voice betrayed her shock. "Don't try to talk. You've been intubated for a while. Blink once for yes." I blinked, tears streaming down my face. "You've been in a coma for 3 months, Sarah. This is unexpected. The doctors didn't think." She stopped herself, pressing the call button. "Let me get Dr. Patel." 3 months. The realization crashed over me. What happened to me? The last thing I remembered was dinner at home with Mark, his mother visiting from Phoenix. I'd made pasta and then nothing. Before the doctor arrived, Donna leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Your husband and mother-in-law weren't expecting you to wake up. They've been telling everyone you wouldn't survive much longer." My heart monitor betrayed my panic with rapid beeping. Donna quickly adjusted something on my fore. "Calm down, Mrs. Carter. I shouldn't have said anything yet, but something's not right. I've been your primary nurse for 2 months, and the way they talk when they think you can't hear." She hesitated. "We should wait for the doctor." Dr. Patel arrived, astonishment evident on his face as he examined me. "Remarkable," he muttered, shining a light in my eyes. "Mrs. Carter, you've defied our expectations. Your brain activity has been minimal. We need to run tests, but this is, well, quite extraordinary." After he left to order scans, Donna returned with ice chips for my parched mouth. As sensation gradually returned to my body, so did snippets of memories. Or were they dreams? Mark and Eleanor standing over my bed discussing finances. Their voices had penetrated my unconscious mind during their visits. "The accounts are cleared out. She's never going to know. The doctors say her brain activity is almost non-existent. We deserve this cruise after everything." When Donna returned later that evening, I managed to croak out my first words. "My husband, stealing?" Her face confirmed my fears before she spoke. "I've been documenting everything, Mrs. Carter. I've worked this floor for 20 years and I've seen family members do terrible things, but this..." She glanced at the door before pulling out her phone. "I shouldn't be involved, but something about them made me suspicious from day one." She showed me photos of receipts, bank statements, credit card bills. All collected from the trash can in my room or photographed when left unattended. A $150,000 luxury cruise booking. Designer clothes. A down payment on a vacation property in Florida. All using my accounts, my savings, my inheritance from my parents. They visit twice a week like clockwork. Always when shift changes happen, always when there's minimal staff. They think no one notices. Donna's voice hardened. "They told the billing department you'd be dead before the end of the month, so they were tying up loose ends with your finances." The betrayal cut deeper than any physical pain. 15 years of marriage to Mark, all those holiday dinners with Eleanor, the joint accounts we'd established with such trust. Had it all been building to this moment? Had I simply been a means to an end? As my strength gradually returned over the next 48 hours, Donna brought me more evidence. Medical records showed my admission for anaphylactic shock, supposedly from accidentally consuming shellfish, which I was deathly allergic to. But the toxicology report showed concentrations that made no sense for accidental exposure. "The levels in your blood work," Donna explained during her night shift when we could talk privately. "Dr. Harrison questioned it initially, but your husband insisted you must have eaten something at a restaurant earlier. With no evidence to suggest otherwise." "They poisoned me," I whispered, the truth crystallizing with horrible clarity. "Mark knows I check every ingredient. I haven't accidentally consumed shellfish since I was 16. My accounting background, 15 years at Carter and Winslow Financial Services before cutting back to part-time after marrying Mark. suddenly became my greatest asset. Numbers never lied. Patterns always revealed the truth. Donna, I need you to do something for me. My voice grew stronger with determination. Don't tell anyone I'm awake. Not yet. But the doctors. Tell them I slipped back under. That it was temporary. Buy me time. My mind was already calculating, planning. They're on their cruise now? Left 3 days ago. 3-week Mediterranean voyage. Donna looked uncertain. You need medical care, rehabilitation. And I'll get it. But if they know I'm awake, they'll empty whatever accounts they haven't already drained and disappear. A cold resolve settled over me. I need my laptop from home. Can you get someone to bring it? Tell them Dr. Patel ordered cognitive tests. Against her better judgment, Donna agreed. My house keys were in the hospital's safe with my personal effects. The next day, her daughter retrieved my laptop from the home office Mark rarely entered. As I slowly regained strength in my atrophied muscles through secret therapy sessions Donna arranged during her shifts, I began piecing together the extent of their betrayal. Mark and Eleanor had timed everything perfectly, or so they thought. They hadn't counted on me waking up. They certainly hadn't counted on Donna's meticulous documentation or my financial expertise. Every night I worked from my hospital bed, using the skills I'd honed throughout my career to trace their digital footprints. Passwords I knew, accounts they thought I'd forgotten, online banking credentials they'd failed to change. We need to tell someone, Donna urged 1 week after my awakening as she helped me sit up independently for the first time. Not yet, I insisted, showing her my laptop screen, a bank transfer confirmation showing the movement of funds to an offshore account. They think they're untouchable on that cruise ship. But the satellite internet they're using? It's creating a perfect trail. I smiled for the first time since waking up, a smile that held no warmth. They've stolen everything from me, including nearly taking my life. But they forgot the most important thing. What's that? Donna asked. Never underestimate an accountant with nothing left to lose. My words hung in the air as Donna nodded grimly. The following morning she arrived for her shift with a manila envelope tucked inside her scrubs. Monthly statements from your checking and savings accounts, she whispered, closing the door behind her. I called the bank pretending to be you, said I was traveling and needed them sent to my sister's address. My home. Most nurses wouldn't risk their licenses this way, but Donna had witnessed too many visiting hours filled with Mark and Eleanor's whispered calculations over my supposedly dying body. Spreading the statements across my lap, I traced my finger along the columns of numbers. Even in my weakened state, the patterns jumped out immediately. Small withdrawals at first, $500 here, $1,000 there, beginning not after my hospitalization but 6 months prior. The amounts gradually increased as they grew bolder, culminating in massive transfers once I was comatose. They were planning this, I murmured, my hands trembling. The accident was just the final step. The timestamps told their own damning story. Withdrawals made minutes after my regular Thursday yoga class. Transfers during my monthly lunch with college friends. They had studied my routine, knowing exactly when I wouldn't notice money disappearing. There's more, Donna said, pulling a folded document from her pocket. Found this in your husband's jacket when he left it on your chair during his last visit. It was a power of attorney form granting Mark complete control over all my financial affairs, supposedly signed 2 days before my allergic reaction. The signature looked convincing at first glance, but after 15 years of signing joint tax returns and Christmas cards, I spotted the flaws. The loop of the Z in Sarah was too tight, the slant of the C in Carter too steep. A decent forgery but not perfect. He forged my signature, I said flatly, feeling strangely calm. And the witnessing notary, Maria Valdez, she doesn't exist, at least not at this address. The notary stamp looks legitimate but the number's wrong. Standard 8 digits, this has 9. Donna looked impressed. How can you tell all that? 5 years auditing suspicious financial documents for Carter and Winslow, I explained. Forgery was my specialty. The irony would be funny if I wasn't the victim. Over the next 3 days, Donna brought more evidence. Retirement account statements showing dramatic changes to beneficiaries, insurance policy modifications, even property deeds with my forged signature transferring ownership of our vacation cabin to Eleanor. The paper trail painted a clear picture, but it was Mark himself who provided the final pieces of the puzzle. His Wednesday visit coincided with what Donna told the staff was a temporary setback in my condition, requiring privacy screens and minimal disruption. Hidden behind the medical equipment, I lay perfectly still, eyes closed, breathing evenly as Mark settled into the visitor's chair beside my bed. His phone rang within minutes. "Hi, Mom," he answered, his voice cheerful in a way I hadn't heard since our early dating days. "Yes, everything's still on schedule. Sarah's condition is deteriorating nicely, according to the doctor I spoke with this morning." The casual cruelty of his words sent ice through my veins. "The Cayman account is all set up. Henderson confirmed the transfers are untraceable." He laughed. "No, they can't freeze them once we're on international waters. That's the beauty of it. Everything will look legitimate from their end. By the time anyone would investigate, we'll have moved the money again." He paused, listening. "Of course I feel something, Mom. 15 years is a long time. But let's be honest, it was your idea to pursue Sarah in the first place. The quiet accountant with the family money, remember? You said she'd be perfect." My heart seemed to stop. Our meet-cute at a charity auction, had that been orchestrated? Our whirlwind romance, his persistent courtship despite my initial hesitation. All calculated? "No point getting sentimental now," Mark continued. "We've got 3 weeks of luxury ahead and the rest of our lives to enjoy her money. The doctors say it's just a matter of time before her organs start failing. Natural causes. No one will question it." After he left, I finally allowed myself to cry, silent tears streaming into my pillow. 15 years of memories kaleidoscoped through my mind. Mark's proposal at my favorite restaurant, our wedding in my parents' backyard, vacations and anniversaries and ordinary Tuesdays. All fabrications. Every "I love you," a stepping stone toward this betrayal. By morning, grief had hardened into determination. Using the hospital Wi-Fi and my laptop, I began meticulously documenting everything. Photographing the forged documents, creating spreadsheets tracking every unauthorized withdrawal, recording dates and times of Mark's damning conversations. "You should be focusing on your recovery," Donna cautioned, adjusting my phone as I typed one-handed. "This is my recovery," I replied without looking up. "Every piece of evidence is another step toward walking out of here." Through careful research, I discovered that digital evidence of financial fraud, especially with clear patterns and documented forgery, was admissible in court. More importantly, with proper documentation, I could potentially take action remotely, freezing accounts and pursuing legal remedies even while Mark and Eleanor sailed blissfully through the Mediterranean. I created secure cloud storage for my growing evidence file, backing up everything in multiple locations. If my laptop disappeared, the trail would remain. I researched law firms specializing in financial fraud, compiling a list of questions for initial consultations. One night, as I scrolled through bank records, I uncovered a strange inconsistency. Large deposits into our joint account before significant withdrawals, money that hadn't come from my salary or investments. "They're using me to launder money," I realized aloud. The deposits aligned perfectly with Eleanor's trips to visit her old friends in Las Vegas, 4 times annually for the past 8 years. This discovery transformed my understanding of their scheme. It wasn't just about stealing my money. I was a respectable front for something larger. My clean financial history and impeccable credit perfect camouflage for their activities. 10 days after my awakening, Dr. Patel noted remarkable improvements in my condition during his actual examinations, though he still believed I was unconscious most of the time. "Her brain activity is increasing," he told Donna within my hearing. "We may need to re-evaluate our prognosis." "Not yet," I whispered to Donna after he left. "I need more time." With steady hands and a steadier resolve, I continued building my case against the husband who had married me for money and the mother-in-law who had orchestrated it all. While they sipped champagne on their stolen cruise, I prepared to sink their carefully constructed ship of lies. My fingertips glided across the keyboard, each keystroke a promise. This betrayal would not stand. The paper trail they'd left would lead straight back to them, and the quiet accountant they'd underestimated would be waiting. But I couldn't do it alone. My body, still recovering from months of atrophy, betrayed me with its weakness. My mind, though sharp with purpose, needed resources beyond my reach. "I need to make a phone call," I told Donna during her night shift. Someone I used to work with. Donna hesitated. Using the hospital phone would create a record. Your cell. Please. I gripped her hand. There's someone who can help us. Jessica Miles had been my protégée at Carter and Winslow. Brilliant with numbers and fiercely loyal, she'd taken over my biggest clients when I reduced my hours after marrying Mark. We'd stayed in touch through monthly lunches until my accident. Donna held her phone to my ear, angling it so I could see Jessica's face when the video call connected. Donna? Is everything? Jessica's voice cut off when she saw me. Sarah? Oh my God, you're awake. Keep your voice down, I whispered. Officially, I'm still in a coma. The shock on Jessica's face shifted to confusion, then understanding as I explained the situation. By the end, her expression hardened with the same determination I felt. Those monsters, she said. What do you need from me? Access. The audit trail software. Your login still works with the premium version, right? Jessica nodded. You want me to track their financial movements? Not a question, she understood immediately. They think they've covered their tracks, but nobody understands digital fingerprints better than we do. 2 days later, Jessica slipped into my hospital room dressed in scrubs Donna had provided. Under her arm she carried a slim laptop case. I brought equipment that can't be traced back to you, she explained, setting up a powerful laptop with specialized financial forensics software. And I've got better news. I've made contact with Ray Connors at First Union Bank. My heart leaped. Ray had been one of my clients, the head of fraud investigation at my primary bank. He agreed to help? Once I explained the situation, he was livid. Jessica grinned. He's granted emergency freezes on Mark's access to your joint accounts, but kept them active so they won't notice anything's wrong. Perfect. I struggled to sit up straighter, wincing as my muscles protested. What about physical therapy? I need to get stronger. Already arranged, Donna said from the doorway. My cousin Troy is a PT on the 4th floor. He's coming after hours, starting tonight. That evening began the dual track of my recovery, physical and financial. While Troy guided my weakened body through exercises to rebuild strength, Jessica and I followed the digital breadcrumbs Mark and Eleanor had left behind. Using password recovery methods on accounts Mark thought were secure, we discovered he'd been careless. His email security questions were painfully easy. His first pet's name, his high school mascot, information I knew from 15 years of marriage. Once inside his email, everything unraveled. Look at this. Jessica pointed to an email chain with a travel agency. He booked the cruise 6 months ago but only finalized the payment the day after you were hospitalized. And here, I noted, scrolling through his sent folder. Instructions to transfer funds to an account in Grand Cayman. We found screenshots of offshore account balances, nearly $400,000 total. Most was mine, but some appeared to come from other sources. Could be previous victims, Jessica suggested grimly. You might not be the first. My stomach turned at the thought. How many other women had Mark targeted before me? The cruise ship's satellite internet became our unexpected ally. Each time Mark or Eleanor made a purchase, champagne at the captain's dinner, excursions at port calls, spa treatments, their transactions created digital timestamps and location data. They're in Barcelona today, Jessica noted on day 12 of my awakening. According to the cruise itinerary, they'll be at sea for 3 days after this, heading toward Morocco. That's the window, I decided. They'll have limited connectivity in international waters. By the time they reach the next port, it'll be too late. While they enjoyed their stolen luxury, Troy pushed my rehabilitation with increasing intensity. You're making remarkable progress, he noted as I completed 10 shaky steps across my hospital room. Most patients take months to recover this much strength after prolonged comas. I'm motivated, I replied, my jaw set as I forced my legs to take another step. During Mark's scheduled call to check on my condition, Dr. Patel, now briefed on the situation by Donna, provided the perfect cover. No significant changes, Mr. Carter. These plateau periods are common with comatose patients. Enjoy the remainder of your vacation. We'll contact you immediately if anything changes. My team grew carefully. Ray from the bank provided official documentation of the unauthorized transactions. A nurse in billing quietly gathered records of Mark's conversations with hospital administration about end-of-life finances. Troy documented my physical recovery, creating evidence that contrasted sharply with Mark's directions to prepare for my imminent death. 14 days after waking up, I felt ready. The cruise ship Oracle was scheduled to depart Barcelona that evening, heading into open waters for 3 days before reaching Casablanca. Everything's in place, Jessica confirmed, showing me the monitoring software tracking Mark and Eleanor's movements. Ray has the emergency protocols ready to implement the moment you give the word. I had regained enough strength to sit properly in a chair, dressed in clothes Donna had brought from home rather than hospital gowns. The woman in the mirror looked thinner, paler, but her eyes burned with purpose. "Are you sure about the timing?" Donna asked as she adjusted my 4-1 last time, for appearances only now as I no longer needed it. "Absolutely," I replied, watching the tracking dot that represented the Oracle moving away from shore. "They need to be far enough from land that they can't easily return. Their arrogance has always been their weakness. They'll check their accounts the moment they receive the notifications, probably right at the ship's bar where everyone can see their reactions." I smiled, feeling a cold satisfaction as I pictured their faces. Mark and Eleanor wanted a memorable cruise. I'm just making sure it's unforgettable. Jessica handed me her laptop. "It's your move, Sarah." With steady hands and a steadier heart, I began executing the counterattack they never saw coming. The quiet accountant they had tried to silence was about to speak volumes. Through the language of numbers they thought they had stolen from me. But first I needed legal protection. Jessica had already made the call. "Melanie Sawyer will be here in an hour," she said, checking her watch. "Best financial fraud attorney in the state. She's canceled her afternoon appointments." "How did you convince her to come so quickly?" I asked. Jessica smiled. "I didn't have to. She handled my sister's divorce 3 years ago when her husband emptied their accounts. When I mentioned attempted murder alongside financial fraud, she was already grabbing her briefcase. Melanie arrived looking exactly like someone who specialized in high-stakes financial cases. Immaculately dressed, carrying a premium leather portfolio, and with eyes that assessed everything in the room before she even spoke. "Mrs. Carter," she said, pulling up a chair beside my bed. "Jessica briefed me, but I need to hear everything from you." For the next 2 hours I walked Melanie through the entire ordeal. The suspicious allergic reaction, the overheard conversations, the unauthorized transfers, the forged documents and the evidence we'd compiled. "This is one of the most comprehensive cases of premeditated financial fraud I've seen," Melanie said, examining our evidence files. "And the timing of your medical emergency alongside these transactions?" She shook her head. "The attempted murder angle won't be hard to establish with the right medical expert." "I don't just want them prosecuted," I said. "I want my money back." "Most fraud victims never recover their funds," Melanie cautioned. "Especially with offshore accounts." "I'm not most victims." I gestured toward Jessica's laptop. "While they're sipping cocktails in the Mediterranean, I've been tracking every account they've opened." Jessica pulled up the audit trail software, showing the network of linked accounts we'd discovered. "We've located approximately $400,000 spread across 6 different banks. 3 in the Cayman Islands, 2 in Switzerland and 1 in Belize." Melanie leaned forward, suddenly very interested. "You found their actual account numbers?" "With access credentials. Mark's password recovery questions were easy to bypass," I explained. "His mother's maiden name, his high school mascot, our anniversary date. Once we had email access, we found everything else." "And you're certain these accounts contain your funds specifically?" I nodded. "My inheritance from my parents was exactly $212,437.68. That exact amount was transferred to the Cayman account 2 days after my hospitalization." Melanie's professional demeanor cracked slightly, revealing a smile. "Then we have options most of my clients don't." Working together, we developed a 2-pronged approach: legal action against Mark and Eleanor and recovery of my stolen funds. Melanie prepared documentation for both civil and criminal complaints, while Jessica and I finalized our plan for the accounts. "The law is clear on this," Melanie assured me. "Those are your funds fraudulently transferred. But recovering them through legal channels could take years, especially with international banks." Which is why we're not waiting, I replied. That evening, Dr. Patel officially updated my medical records to show I'd regained consciousness, documenting my actual condition rather than the deterioration Mark had been told to expect. The hospital's legal team, briefed by Melanie, agreed to provide all medical evidence necessary for the criminal investigation. The toxicology reports became our smoking gun. Dr. Harrison, who had initially questioned the levels of allergens in my blood work, provided a detailed statement explaining why the concentration found in my system was inconsistent with accidental exposure. The levels suggest direct ingestion of concentrated shellfish extract, he wrote. Something no one with a known severe allergy would willingly consume. Donna's documentation of Mark and Eleanor's behavior, combined with the hospital billing department's records of their inquiries about end-of-life finances, completed the picture of premeditated harm. By day 16 of my awakening, everything was in place. The Oracle was now in international waters between Spain and Morocco, its satellite internet providing intermittent connectivity that would make any emergency response from Mark and Eleanor nearly impossible. It's time, I told my small team gathered in my hospital room. Let's begin. Jessica initiated the first step, accessing the offshore accounts through the credentials we'd discovered. One by one we transferred funds back to secure accounts Melanie had established in my name, not taking everything but rather specific amounts matching exactly what had been stolen from me. $212,437.68 from the Cayman account, Jessica confirmed. Transferred successfully. $76,000 from the Swiss account, I added, watching the confirmation appear on screen. That matches the liquidated retirement funds. In total, we recovered $358,452.39, nearly everything they had taken from me. The remainder, approximately $42,000, represented money they'd already spent on their cruise and other luxuries. What about the excess? Melanie asked, pointing to funds still remaining in their hidden accounts. That's another $150,000 that doesn't seem to be yours. Probably other victims, I said quietly. Or other illegal activities. We don't touch that, the authorities will handle it. Instead, I had something more fitting in mind. Working with Ray from the bank's fraud department, we identified 5 charities focusing on financial abuse victims and medical research for coma patients. With a few keystrokes, I donated $150,000 from their remaining funds, divided equally among these organizations. Make sure each donation receipt lists Mark and Eleanor Carter as the generous donors, I instructed. Complete with their home address and contact information. Melanie filed our legal complaints electronically, setting in motion both civil and criminal proceedings. By morning, Detective James Wilson from the Financial Crimes Unit had opened an official investigation, working with his colleagues in violent crimes to address the attempted murder aspect. We'll have officers waiting when their ship docks back in Miami, he assured me during his hospital interview. The evidence you've provided is extremely compelling, Mrs. Carter. The final touch came from Donna, whose cousin worked for the cruise line's customer service department. We can have something delivered to their cabin, she suggested. A little notification of what awaits them. I drafted a simple message to accompany the charity donation receipts. Recovered, aware, and waiting. Enjoy the remainder of your cruise. Sarah. As Jessica tracked their ship's progress, we watched and waited. The moment of truth would come at 2:15 p.m. ship time, when the Oracle satellite system would connect for daily updates and our package would be delivered to their cabin. They've just received the package, Jessica announced, watching the delivery confirmation. And Mark's accessing his accounts now. He's trying the Cayman Islands one first. I imagined his face as he discovered the transfers, the growing panic as he checked account after account. The frantic calls to his mother's cabin. Their desperate attempts to contact their bankers, hampered by the ship's limited connectivity. The ship won't reach the next port for 58 hours, Donna noted, checking the itinerary. They're completely trapped. I leaned back against my pillows, feeling a calm satisfaction that had nothing to do with vengeance and everything to do with justice. They had left me for dead, stealing not just my money but the future I'd planned. Now they would face the consequences of their actions, stranded at sea with plenty of time to contemplate what awaited them at shore. Justice, I murmured, is best served cold. And with an ocean view. The next 58 hours passed with remarkable speed. As Mark and Eleanor remained trapped at sea, my recovery accelerated. By the time their ship docked, I had progressed from shuffling steps to walking the hospital corridor unassisted, my body responding to the urgency of my spirit. Dr. Patel signed my discharge papers the morning the Oracle was scheduled to arrive in Miami. "Medically speaking, this is unprecedented," he said, reviewing my charts. "Most patients require months of rehabilitation after prolonged comas." "Most patients weren't poisoned by their spouses," I replied, accepting the wheelchair hospital policy required for my exit. Nothing motivates recovery like justice. Melanie had arranged for a private investigator to document Mark and Eleanor's return. The photos arrived on my new secure phone as Jessica drove me to the temporary apartment she'd helped me rent. Mark's face contorted with panic as police officers approached him on the gangway. Eleanor attempting to flee before being intercepted by a female detective, their luggage being searched on the dock. "They were arrested without incident," Detective Wilson confirmed in his call. "They're being processed now on multiple charges including attempted murder, grand theft and fraud. Given the evidence, the DA is confident they'll remain in custody until trial." My next stop was my home, accompanied by Jessica, Melanie and 2 police officers. The search warrant Melanie had obtained allowed us to recover any items purchased with my funds, plus collect additional evidence. Walking through the front door was surreal, like entering a museum exhibit of my former life. "Are you okay?" Jessica asked, noticing my hesitation in the foyer. "Yes," I answered, surprised to find it was true. "This isn't really my home anymore. Just a crime scene." In Mark's home office, investigators discovered the missing pieces of our puzzle. Notebooks detailing previous financial schemes, records of investments from other women, and most damning, a small vial labeled shellfish extract hidden in a locked desk drawer. "They weren't just planning to steal your money," Melanie observed as the vial was carefully bagged as evidence. "They wanted to eliminate any chance you'd come looking for it." The community response surprised me most. As news of Mark and Eleanor's arrest spread, neighbors I'd known for years came forward with observations they'd kept to themselves. "Eleanor was always asking about your schedule," admitted Diane from across the street when she visited me at my new apartment. "When you'd be home, when you'd be traveling for work. I thought she was just being a concerned mother-in-law." "And Mark," added her husband Tom, "he'd been meeting with that real estate agent back in January, the one who specializes in overseas properties. Said it was for a client, but they were looking at brochures for Costa Rica. Even Mark's co-workers at the investment firm reached out. He'd been acting strange for months," his assistant Maria told me. "Making private calls, clearing his browser history. We never suspected anything this terrible." Their support was comforting but also raised uncomfortable questions. How had I missed the warning signs that others had noticed? The accountant who could spot a decimal point error in a 1,000-line spreadsheet had failed to see the deception in her own home. 3 months after my discharge, I channeled this realization into purpose. With Jessica's help, I established a monthly support group for financial fraud survivors. Our first meeting, held in a community center conference room, drew 12 attendees. By the 3rd month, we needed a larger venue. "Many victims never come forward because of shame," I explained to the group. "We blame ourselves for not seeing the signs, for trusting too easily, for being stupid about money. But predators like Mark and Eleanor count on that silence. They thrive on our embarrassment." The preliminary hearing for Mark and Eleanor's case became my next milestone. Still using a cane for support during longer walks, I entered the courtroom determined to face them directly. Mark couldn't meet my eyes, but Eleanor stared with undisguised hatred as I took the witness stand. My testimony lasted 4 hours, my accountant's precision serving me well as I detailed every unauthorized transaction, every forged document, every overheard conversation. The medical experts who followed confirmed what we already knew. My shellfish reaction had been no accident. The concentration found in Mrs. Carter's system, Dr. Harrison testified, could only result from deliberate ingestion of processed shellfish extract, something no person with her allergy history would voluntarily consume. Both were denied bail, deemed flight risks given the offshore accounts and evident premeditation. As they were led away in handcuffs, I felt no triumph, only a quiet certainty that they could harm no one else. 6 months after my awakening, I received an unexpected call from Ray Connors at the bank. "We've been following your tastes, Sarah," he said. "The financial security training you've been offering through your support group, we'd like to formalize it. Would you consider developing a program for our customers? Particularly those in vulnerable situations like recent widows, elderly clients." The project gave me fresh purpose. Working from my new home office, I developed educational materials that translated complex financial security concepts into accessible guidance. My first workshop, hosted at the bank's community room, drew 30 attendees, mostly older women managing money alone for the first time. "My husband handled everything," one participant shared. "Now I'm terrified of making mistakes, of trusting the wrong person." "That fear is your protection," I told her. "But it shouldn't be your prison." Mark and Eleanor's trial began 11 months after my awakening. By then, I walked without assistance, had moved into a new home in a different neighborhood, and had established a growing reputation as an advocate for financial fraud prevention. The prosecution's case was overwhelming, strengthened by 3 other women who came forward with stories of financial entanglement with Mark. The jury deliberated for just 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Mark received 18 years for attempted murder and financial crimes. Eleanor, as the mastermind, received 22. As the 1-year anniversary of my awakening approached, I faced a decision about my professional future. The workshops had expanded to 3 banks, 2 community colleges, and several retirement communities. Jessica urged me to think bigger. "You could reach more people with your own firm," she suggested over lunch. "Specialized financial consulting focused on protection and education." I opened Sentinel Financial Consulting on the exact 1-year mark of regaining consciousness. The small office suite accommodated myself, Jessica, who joined as a partner, and 2 recent accounting graduates committed to our protective mission. Our client list grew steadily, primarily through word-of-mouth referrals from those who'd attended workshops. At our modest opening reception, Donna arrived with a small gift-wrapped package. Inside was a framed photo of me in my hospital bed, laptop open, determination on my face. "To remind you," she said, "of how far you've come." Later that evening, alone in my new office, I studied the photograph. The woman captured there looked fragile physically but possessed an unmistakable strength in her eyes. They had underestimated that woman, assumed her value lay only in her accounts and assets. They never understood that her true worth lay in her resilience, her precision, her capacity to transform victim into victor. I placed the photograph prominently on my desk, a daily reminder that my second chance wasn't just about survival. It was about ensuring others had the knowledge to protect themselves from predators like Mark and Eleanor. They had tried to silence me permanently, but instead had given inadvertent voice to my true calling. Where they had seen only a quiet accountant, the world would now know an advocate. Where they had planned an ending, I had found a beginning. Where they had sought to steal my life, I had instead reclaimed it. Stronger, wiser, and with purpose that no one could ever take away. 3 years ago my father hissed, "You're dead to us," as they stripped me of my name, my wealth, even my face. Today, under the neon glow of Tokyo's rain-soaked streets, I stepped into my own funeral. The coffin empty, "Miss me?" I whispered, peeling off my mask. The screams began. "You're dead to us," Nicholas Carson hissed, his wedding ring still wet with my blood as he towered over me. The words hung in the air like poison, transforming 25 years of family into ash. Just yesterday I had been Sophia Carson, beloved daughter and heiress to an empire. Now I was nobody. 3 hours earlier the dinner table had gleamed under chandelier light, crystal glasses capturing prisms that danced across hand-painted china. Nicholas adjusted his Hermes tie with manicured fingers, clearing his throat with the practiced authority that had silenced boardrooms for decades. The sound resonated through our cavernous dining room, immediately halting the soft clink of silverware. I knew that sound. It preceded every life-altering announcement he'd ever made. "The Anderson merger depends on this, Sophia." His voice carried the smooth confidence of a man unaccustomed to being refused. "Richard's son is a fine match, Ivy League educated and primed to take over his father's portion of the business. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to thank each of you for being part of this incredible journey. If you're finding yourself drawn to stories of identity, resilience, and the courage it takes to reclaim your truth against all odds, consider subscribing. It's completely free and helps us share more stories of people rising from their own ashes. Now let's dive into a tale where being declared dead was just the beginning. My fingers trembled against the Egyptian cotton tablecloth, a microscopic rebellion my body initiated before my mind could catch up. I looked from my stepfather to my stepmother Olivia, who sat perfectly poised in her Chanel dress, eyes fixated on her barely touched salmon as if it contained secret messages. The pearls around her neck caught the light as she swallowed uncomfortably. 3 years of dating Eric in secret had culminated in this moment. Clandestine coffee dates in obscure cafes, stolen weekends when I was supposedly at leadership retreats, photos hidden in an encrypted folder labeled market research. My stomach churned as I formed the words that would detonate the perfect life Nicholas had engineered. I'm already in love with someone else. Nicholas's fork clattered against fine china, the sound like a gunshot in our dining room. 25 years of being the perfect daughter, the straight-A student, the impeccable debutante, the corporate heiress in training, evaporated in an instant as his face contorted with rage. I'd seen that expression directed at underperforming executives, never at me. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked 7 excruciating seconds of silence. Who? Olivia whispered, finally meeting my gaze, her perfectly manicured hand reaching for her wine glass. A tiny tremor betrayed her composure as Cabernet sloshed dangerously close to the rim. His name is Eric. He's a photographer I met at the Thompson Foundation Gala last year. The words tumbled out faster now as if speed could somehow soften the impact. He's talented and kind and... A nobody with a camera? Nicholas interrupted, his voice dropping to that dangerous register he reserved for corporate takeovers. He dabbed his mouth with his napkin, the gesture deliberately slow. You'd throw away your future for that? The familiar knot formed in my chest, the one that had appeared whenever I'd considered disappointing him. Since childhood I'd been desperate for approval from the man who'd raised me since I was 4. Every achievement, from Princeton graduation to my MBA, had been pursued with Nicholas's approving nod as the ultimate prize. But something in me snapped. Perhaps it was Eric's words from the night before. You're more than just the Carson name, Sophia. He sees me, I said, my voice steadier than I felt, not some corporate pawn to be married off for a business advantage. The slap came without warning, his palm connecting with my cheek with such force that my head jerked sideways. The cold press of his wedding ring cut into my skin, and I tasted copper as my inner cheek split against my teeth. 25 years of calculated affection, and I'd never seen the violence that lurked beneath his polished veneer. Nicholas! Olivia gasped, half rising from her chair. He ignored her, straightening his cuffs as if he'd merely signed a contract rather than struck his daughter. You have until tomorrow to come to your senses, he hissed, rising from his chair with dreadful composure. Either you call this photographer and end it, or you're no longer welcome in this house. The door to his study slammed, leaving Olivia and me in brittle silence. She wouldn't meet my eyes as she rose, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her dress. He doesn't mean it, I whispered, touching my throbbing cheek. He can't. Her laugh was hollow as she collected her wine glass. Oh, Sophia. You've never understood him at all. That night, I paced my bedroom, a pristine showcase of wealth with its hand-painted wallpaper and antique 4-poster bed. The space suddenly felt foreign, like a museum exhibit of someone else's life. I pulled a Rimowa suitcase from my closet, the one I'd used for Aspen ski weekends and Mediterranean summers, and began filling it with essentials. Tears streamed down my face as I touched the framed photos on my dresser. Nicholas teaching me to ride at our Hamptons estate, Olivia adjusting my graduation cap, the 3 of us on our yacht in St. Tropez, all perfect white teeth and designer sunglasses. A flawless family narrative, curated for Christmas cards and society pages. At 3 a.m. I found myself in the East Wing Gallery, staring at generations of Carson portraits. Distinguished men in bespoke suits and women with heirloom jewels, none bearing my chestnut hair or wide-set eyes. How had I never noticed before? My fingers traced the frame of Nicholas's imposing portrait, searching his painted features for any resemblance to mine and finding none. Dawn broke with cruel clarity. I showered, applied concealer to my bruised cheek, and dressed in a Burberry suit I'd worn to my first board meeting, armor for what was to come. When the house stirred with morning routines, I walked steadily to Nicholas's home office and knocked. "Enter," he called, voice crisp as if yesterday's violence had never occurred. I stood before his mahogany desk, shoulders back despite my trembling knees. The morning light cast his silver hair in an almost angelic glow, a cruel contrast to the coldness in his eyes. "I won't marry someone I don't love just so you can secure a business deal." Each word felt like a small victory, a declaration of independence. Nicholas set down his fountain pen with deliberate slowness. "Then you'll leave with nothing. The trust fund, the car, your credit cards, all contingent on being a Carson." His tone was matter-of-fact, as if discussing whether rather than dismantling my existence. The ground seemed to shift beneath my Louboutins. "You'd disown your own daughter over this?" The silence that followed was broken by Olivia's voice from the doorway. "You were never really his daughter anyway, Sophia." She entered like a ghost, still in her silk robe, eyes red-rimmed from either tears or wine. "It's time she knew, Nicholas." The truth spilled out in ugly fragments as Olivia described how they'd adopted me after my biological parents, friends of theirs, died in an accident. James and Elizabeth Reed, she called them. Names that should have been familiar but instead felt like fiction. "We took you in as a favor," she said, her voice hollow. "Gave you our name and everything money could buy." Nicholas nodded grimly. "And this is how you repay our generosity. By refusing the one thing we've ever asked of you." My world imploded as 25 years of identity crumbled. The room tilted as realization washed over me. The different coloring, the absence of childhood photos before age 4, the whispers at family reunions that suddenly stopped when I approached. "Why didn't you ever tell me I was adopted?" I whispered. Nicholas's response was biting. "Would it have made a difference? You still owe us everything you are." "I owe you gratitude, not servitude," I managed, though my voice cracked. "I'm not a possession to be traded for corporate advantage." His eyes narrowed. Clearly we failed to instill proper values. The Sophia Carson we raised would understand her responsibilities to this family. Perhaps I'm more Reed than Carson after all. When I turned to leave, his final words cut deeper than the now dried blood on my cheek. "Walk out that door and you're dead to us. The Sophia Carson we raised would never be this selfish." I didn't look back. Security guards appeared as if summoned by telepathy, flanking me as I returned to my room for my suitcase. Their presence transformed the home I'd grown up in into hostile territory, my childhood bedroom into a space I was no longer welcome to occupy. "I need more time," I protested as they ushered me toward the front entrance. "There are things, mementos, photos." "Mr. Carson's instructions were clear, miss," the older guard said, his expression professionally blank despite having known me since childhood. They escorted me past the gallery with its judging ancestors, through the soaring foyer with its marble fountain, and down the limestone steps that had witnessed countless society events. The gates that had enclosed my childhood swung open, then closed behind me with electronic finality. I stood on the sidewalk, designer suitcase at my feet, struck by the absurdity of the moment. Joggers passed, casting curious glances at the woman in business attire stranded outside one of Boston's most prestigious addresses. One of the guards, Marco, who taught me to drive when I was 16, approached hesitantly, extending an envelope. "Mrs. Carson wanted you to have this." His eyes held an apology he couldn't vocalize. Inside was a single black and white photo of a young couple holding an infant, my real parents, and enough cash for a week in a cheap motel. No note, no explanation. Just strangers' faces and temporary financial mercy. The last thing I saw before turning away was Eric's Audi pulling into the driveway, his artistic profile visible through the windshield. The car I'd helped him choose when his first gallery show had sold out. Hours later, as I sat on the edge of a creaking bed in a motel that advertised hourly rates, his tearful phone call confirmed what I'd suspected. Nicholas had offered him money to disappear, and unlike me, Eric had taken the deal. "It's not what you think," he sobbed. "The gallery, my career, he would have destroyed everything." "How much?" I asked, voice empty. How much was I worth? The silence told me enough. Alone and suddenly nameless, I walked toward downtown Boston, the weight of rejection crushing my chest with each step. 25 years of identity stripped away in a single day, leaving behind only the raw, uncertain truth. I had never been who I thought I was. The neon sign of the Bluebird Motel flickered erratically, casting sickly pulses of light across the stained carpet. The wallpaper peeled at the corners in defeated curls, a fitting backdrop to my unraveling life. I lay motionless on the sagging mattress, watching water stains on the ceiling morph into accusatory faces. Day blended into night and back again, time losing meaning as I replayed Nicholas's final words on endless loop. "You're dead to us." 7 days of mindless grief had depleted Olivia's emergency cash. The motel manager had knocked twice already, his thin politeness wearing as thin as my prospects. I tried my credit cards at an ATM. All declined with the same cold electronic finality. My phone buzzed with automatic overdraft notices from accounts I'd been locked out of. 25 years of financial security vanished like morning fog. I caught my reflection in the bathroom's cracked mirror. Hollow eyes, unwashed hair, the fading bruise on my cheek now yellowed around the edges. The woman staring back was a stranger whose life had imploded without warning. Not Sophia Carson, Boston socialite and corporate heiress. Just a nameless refugee with dwindling options. Panic clawed at my throat as I scrolled through my contacts, eliminated name after name. Society friends who owed their loyalty to Nicholas. Business associates who would never cross him. Former classmates too distant to trust with something so overwhelming. Only one name remained, Megan Rhodes. We'd been inseparable throughout childhood until Nicholas deemed her family insufficient connections, when we turned 16. I'd maintained our friendship in secret ever since, meeting for coffee when I could escape Nicholas's orbit. Would she even answer after months of sporadic contact? Her voice, when she picked up on the second ring, held no hesitation. "Sophia? Is everything okay? You never call this late." The simple kindness in her tone broke something inside me. Words tumbled out in disjointed fragments. Disowned, adopted, homeless. She cut through my rambling with the decisiveness I'd always admired. "My address is 842 Maple Avenue, apartment 3B. Come now. I'll have the couch ready." 2 hours later, I sat in her modest but warm living room, clutching a mug of tea with trembling hands as I recounted everything. Her expression shifted from shock to outrage as I described Nicholas's manipulation and violence. "Stay here until you figure things out," she insisted, showing me to her spare bedroom, a tiny space dominated by a futon and overflowing bookshelves. No one would think to look for the Carson heiress in my teacher's salary apartment. That night, curled beneath borrowed blankets that smelled of fabric softener rather than Egyptian cotton, I sobbed until my ribs ached. Not just for the material comforts lost, but for the shattered illusion of family I desperately believed in. Every childhood memory now required re-examination. Had any of Nicholas's rare displays of affection been genuine, or merely calculated investments in a future corporate asset? The photograph of my biological parents lay on the nightstand, their young faces looking back at me with unsettling familiarity. James and Elizabeth Reed, strangers who had given me life, whose features I now searched for in my own. Had they loved me? Did they have families still living who might claim me? Questions multiplied in the darkness, keeping sleep at bay until exhaustion finally pulled me under. I awoke to rain pattering against unfamiliar windows and the distant sounds of Megan preparing for work. A text notification illuminated my phone screen from an unknown number, the message making my blood run cold. "We need to talk. Meet me at Westlake Park at noon. Important information about your adoption." Oh. My thumb hovered over the delete button. Olivia had stood silent while Nicholas disowned me, had participated in the lie that formed the foundation of my existence. Yet she'd slipped me that photograph and cash, small mercies that suggested, what? Guilt? Regret? "You shouldn't go," Megan said from the doorway, reading my expression with the ease of old friendship. "It could be a trap. Or it could be answers," I countered, already knowing my decision. "About who I really am. Where I come from. At least let me drive you. I'll watch from a distance." I shook my head. "If Nicholas is having you watched too, that would just endanger you. I can't risk that." Despite my better judgment, desperation for answers pulled me toward the park like a magnet. I arrived early, positioning myself with clear sight lines to all entrances, a baseball cap pulled low over my face. The spring rain had driven away most visitors, leaving only a few determined joggers circling the path. At precisely noon, a black town car pulled up to the southern entrance. Olivia emerged wearing oversized sunglasses, a chic trench coat and evident anxiety. She scanned the park systematically, clutching her designer handbag like a shield. I approached from behind, startling her. "You wanted to talk?" She flinched, then gestured to a secluded bench beneath a dripping cherry tree. "Nicholas doesn't know I'm here," she whispered, glancing repeatedly over her shoulder. "There's something you should know about your parents." Up close, Olivia looked haggard beneath her perfect makeup. Fine lines around her mouth deepened by whatever burden she carried. She slid a manila envelope across the wet bench between us. "I found these hidden in Nicholas's private safe, behind the Monet in his study." Inside were yellowed newspaper clippings about my biological parents' accident, police reports with troubling inconsistencies, and most damning, a handwritten letter from Elizabeth Reed to Nicholas dated 3 weeks before their deaths. "We cannot in good conscience remain silent about what we've discovered," my mother had written. Asterisk, "If the SEC investigation reveals your involvement, we'll have no choice but to testify." They were threatening to expose Nicholas's first investment scheme, Olivia explained, voice trembling. "The one that built his initial fortune. I always suspected he was involved somehow in their accident, but I never had proof until I found these." The world tilted sideways as implications crashed into me. Not just adopted but orphaned by the very man who'd raised me. The photograph of my parents took on horrific new dimensions. Had Nicholas kept it as some perverse trophy? "Why are you telling me this now?" I demanded, my voice razor-sharp. "After 25 years of silence?" Olivia's perfectly manicured hands twisted in her lap. "Because I'm afraid, Sophia. Afraid of what he's capable of. When you left, something changed in him. He's been making calls, checking security footage. He's obsessed with retrieving something he thinks you might have taken." "I didn't take anything. But he thinks you did. Or might have seen something. Her eyes suddenly widened, focusing on something behind me. "He followed me," she gasped, then shoved me hard toward the fountain. "Run." I stumbled forward, clutching the envelope to my chest as I turned to see what had terrified her. The man approaching wasn't Nicholas, but someone equally familiar. Vincent Keller, Nicholas's problem solver. I'd seen him at corporate events, always hovering at the periphery, his bland features masking something cold and reptilian. His grip closed around my arm like a vice, fingers digging into flesh with practiced efficiency. "Miss Carson," he said, voice professionally neutral despite the violence of his grasp. "Your father is concerned about your mental state. Let me help you to the car." A black SUV idled at the curb, windows tinted against curious eyes. Panic surged through me as I realized the magnitude of the danger. This wasn't about family disappointment. It was about silencing a potential witness. Olivia screamed for help, the sound shrill and desperate enough to turn heads among the few park visitors. Vincent's partner emerged from the SUV, his hand reaching beneath his jacket and emerging with a pistol. 2 shots cracked the air, deliberately fired skyward but achieving their purpose, scattering bystanders in panicked confusion. In the chaos, I fought with unexpected ferocity, years of country club tennis and equestrian training translating into physical strength Vincent hadn't anticipated. My nails raked his cheek, drawing blood as I twisted violently against his grip. For one brief moment I broke free, stumbling backward toward the ornate fountain that centered the park. "You know too much now," he snarled, all pretense of professionalism abandoned as he lunged for me again. We struggled at the fountain's edge, my fingers desperately clutching the envelope of evidence while fighting to maintain balance on rain-slicked stone. His hands found my shoulders, shoving with calculated force. The world tilted, gravity claiming me as I fell backward. The last thing I remember was my head cracking against the stone edge, a single crystalline moment of blinding pain before the fountain's cold water rushed over my face, filling my nose and mouth as consciousness fled. Beeping machines pulled me back to a world of agony. My head throbbed with each heartbeat, my face a landscape of pain so intense it transcended specific location. Bandages obscured my vision, and when I tried to move my hands to explore the damage, I discovered they too were wrapped in gauze. "Don't touch," came a gentle female voice. A nurse's face swam into focus, her expression professional yet tinged with pity. "The doctor will be in shortly to explain everything." The everything was delivered in clinical terms that did nothing to soften the reality. "Severe facial trauma," the neurosurgeon explained, reviewing my chart. The impact shattered your orbital bone and cheekbone. We've stabilized you, but you'll need extensive reconstructive surgery once the swelling subsides. A police officer appeared at my bedside later that day, notebook in hand and skepticism evident in his posture. He took my statement with professional detachment, his pen hesitating over certain details. You understand, he said finally, that Mr. Carson has already filed reports about his mentally unstable adopted daughter threatening the family after being cut off financially. Mrs. Carson stated you became agitated during your meeting and attempted to assault her before falling into the fountain. That's a lie, I protested, wincing as the movement sent fresh pain through my shattered face. The envelope, there was evidence. No envelope was recovered at the scene, he said, closing his notebook with an air of finality. Just you, unconscious in the fountain with witnesses who saw you acting erratically. 2 days later, Megan sneaked past hospital security, her face pale with shock at my appearance. Oh God, Sophia, she whispered, hand covering her mouth. What have they done to you? Made me unrecognizable apparently, I managed through swollen lips. She perched on the edge of the hospital bed, eyes darting nervously to the door. Everyone's talking about it. It's all over the news, but twisted. Nicholas is telling people you attacked Olivia in the park after she rejected your attempt at reconciliation. They're saying you had some kind of breakdown after learning about your adoption. And Olivia? Is she backing this story? Megan's silence was answer enough. That evening, I managed to turn on the television in my hospital room, my bandaged fingers fumbling with the remote. The familiar logo of the local news appeared, followed by a somber anchor. Sophia Carson, recently disowned by prominent businessman Nicholas Carson, remains in critical condition after an apparent suicide attempt. Sources close to the family say Carson had been displaying erratic behavior following revelations about her adoption. The screen showed an old photograph of me at a charity gala, smiling beside Nicholas and Olivia, the perfect family now fractured by alleged mental instability. The carefully constructed narrative left no room for alternative explanations. No murderous intentions, no corporate cover-ups, just a troubled young woman unable to handle rejection. My medical bills were mysteriously paid by an anonymous donor. When I was finally discharged a week later, my face still heavily bandaged and barely functional, a woman I'd never seen before waited in the lobby. Tall and elegant in a charcoal pantsuit, she approached with purposeful steps. My name is Yumiko Tanaka, she said, her American accent contrasting with her Japanese name. I represent someone who believes you need to disappear before Nicholas silences you permanently. She guided me to a sleek black sedan with diplomatic plates, revealing no emotion as I eased my broken body into the leather seat. Once we were moving through rain-slicked streets, she handed me a slim portfolio. Inside lay a plane ticket to Tokyo, a new passport under the name Claire Bennett, and a data drive. My hands trembled as I examined the unfamiliar name beneath a photograph taken since my injuries, face still swollen but recognizably altered. The reconstructive surgery you need? My employer will cover it in exchange for information about Carson Industries' operations in Asia. Yumiko continued, her voice matter-of-fact. It's a mutually beneficial arrangement. You get a new face, a new identity, and protection from Nicholas. My employer gets insider knowledge about his biggest competitor. With nowhere else to turn and a face too damaged to recognize, I made my decision in the time it took for one labored breath. 12 hours later, I boarded a plane to a country I'd never visited, my old life burning to ashes behind me as the aircraft lifted through cloud-heavy skies. Rain streaked down the windows of Dr. Hiroshi Matsuda's office, transforming Tokyo's neon landscape into a watercolor of bleeding lights. His skilled fingers moved with practiced precision as he unwrapped the final layer of bandages from my face, his expression revealing nothing. Please remain still, he murmured, his accented English formal but kind. 3 surgeries over 6 months had reconstructed what Vincent's attack had destroyed. The first had been emergency repair, performed while I was still heavily sedated from the international flight. The second and third were more deliberate, artistic even, using the faded photograph of my mother as reference. The last bandage fell away and Dr. Matsuda stepped back, studying his work with the critical eye of a sculptor. The resemblance to your birth mother is remarkable, he finally observed, retrieving a hand mirror from his desk drawer. Perhaps this was meant to be. My fingers trembled as I accepted the mirror, hesitating before lifting it to eye level. A stranger looked back at me, higher cheekbones, a slightly narrower nose, fuller lips. The changes were subtle individually but transformative in their totality. My eyes alone remained unchanged, the one feature I'd apparently inherited from my father. Words failed me as I traced the unfamiliar contours with my fingertips. Your facial bone structure required significant reconstruction, Dr. Matsuda explained. I took the liberty of using your mother's features as a template. More natural than arbitrary choices. I was no longer Sophia Carson but Claire Bennett, a ghost with my mother's face. The American socialite had died in a hospital bed while I emerged in her place, remade and renamed. My mysterious benefactor, who I now knew was Akira Nakamura, a businessman Nicholas had double-crossed during Carson Industries' first expansion into Asian markets, appeared at my final post-operative appointment. Tall and immaculately dressed in a charcoal suit, his silver-streaked hair the only concession to his 60 years, Akira bowed slightly before taking the seat beside me. "You heal well," he observed, his English precise and unaccented. "Dr. Matsuda has exceeded expectations." "Why help me?" I asked directly, still unaccustomed to Japanese conversational indirectness. "What do you really want?" Akira's smile never reached his eyes. Nicholas Carson destroyed my family's pharmaceutical company through industrial espionage and manufactured scandals. My father died believing himself a failure. He straightened his already perfect cuffs. "But revenge alone is poor strategy. You possess knowledge valuable to my current enterprises." The arrangement was presented as a business transaction rather than charity. An apartment in Shibuya and a position at Nakamura Tech Security utilizing the business degree Nicholas had paid for. In exchange, I would provide insider information about Carson Industries' operations, particularly in Asian markets. "Your new identity is complete," Akira said, sliding a folder across the desk. "Claire Bennett, American expatriate with degrees from Northwestern. Background checks will confirm your credentials." "And if I refuse?" His expression remained impassive. "Then you are welcome to return to America, where Nicholas Carson's reach extends through every level of influence you once took for granted." The choice was no choice at all. Tokyo's overwhelming sensory landscape became both my refuge and my classroom. The constant crush of humanity in Shibuya Crossing, the bewildering subway system with its color-coded lines, the indecipherable storefronts and food menus, all forced me into a state of perpetual alertness that left little room for dwelling on the past. My apartment was modest by American standards but considered spacious for Tokyo. A one-bedroom on the 12th floor of a modern building, with a balcony overlooking the city's endless expanse. I spent countless nights watching the metropolis pulse with life, so different from Boston's orderly historical charm. In America, I'd been sheltered, groomed to be the perfect corporate wife. Here, necessity forced me to navigate crowded trains, learn basic Japanese phrases through late-night study sessions, and live modestly on my entry-level salary. The Carson Black credit cards and limitless resources were relics of another lifetime. Yumiko became my guide and eventually my friend, though her initial manner remained professionally distant. Each morning she appeared at my apartment door precisely at 7:30, escorting me through the labyrinthine subway system to Nakamura headquarters, correcting my fumbling attempts at Japanese along the way. "Your pronunciation is improving," she noted one morning, 3 months into my new life. "But your body language still screams American." "What does that mean?" "You take up too much space. Stand like this." She demonstrated a slightly pigeon-toed stance, shoulders drawn inward. Japanese women make themselves smaller in public. I mimicked her posture, earning a rare nod of approval. "Better. The goal is to blend in, not stand out." Gradually, our relationship warmed as she introduced me to her Tokyo, tiny yakitori restaurants down narrow alleys, a hidden jazz club in Shinjuku where the pianist had once played with Miles Davis, a temple garden in Yanaka where plum blossoms perfumed the February air. Over steaming bowls of tonkatsu ramen one rainy evening, Yumiko finally shared what I'd suspected but never confirmed. "Your stepfather believes you died from complications after your suicide attempt," she informed me, breaking apart her chopsticks with practiced precision. "Akira arranged for medical records to be falsified." There was even a small funeral. I froze mid-bite, noodles suspended between bowl and mouth. A funeral? Who attended? Nicholas and Olivia, of course. Some business associates. A few society friends. She studied my reaction carefully. The Boston Globe ran a small obituary. Troubled heiress succumbs to injuries after suicide attempt. Quite neat, really. The knowledge should have devastated me, but instead I felt strangely liberated. In death, I'd found freedom from Nicholas's influence. My nightmares, however, told a different story. Recurring dreams where I was drowning in Westlake Park's fountain while Nicholas watched from the shore, unmoved. Earning Akira's trust meant providing detailed information about Carson Industries' operations. Each week, I met with his executive team, drawing on years of shadowing Nicholas at corporate events and board meetings. I recalled conversations overheard in his study, names dropped at dinner parties, projects mentioned in passing. Carson Pharmaceuticals initiated trials for CS-114 in rural Indonesia last spring. I explained during one such meeting, sketching organizational charts from memory. The FDA rejected their application after Phase 1 showed liver toxicity in 30% of subjects. Akira's legal team confirmed my information through their own channels. These trials violate international ethics standards, the head counsel reported. They're testing drugs rejected by American regulators on unsuspecting patients in rural hospitals, falsifying consent documents. The evidence I helped compile eventually led to a quiet settlement with affected families, though Nicholas's name remained untarnished publicly. Carson Industries sacrificed a mid-level executive as the scapegoat, claiming ignorance of his unauthorized actions. My role in this small victory awakened something I'd suppressed my entire life. A sense of justice that had nothing to do with pleasing authority figures. For the first time, I'd acted not as Nicholas's daughter or Akira's asset, but as myself, whatever that now meant. On the anniversary of my death, I found myself drawn to a tiny Buddhist temple in Asakusa. Rain fell in gentle sheets as I stood beneath the shelter of an ancient maple, watching an elderly monk light incense before a stone altar. "You are troubled," he observed in Japanese, startling me with his sudden attention. My Japanese is not good. I apologized in his language, the phrase is still awkward on my tongue. "Your spirit speaks clearly enough," he replied in surprisingly fluent English. "You seek peace for a person who no longer exists." His wisdom penetrated my carefully constructed walls. I was neither Sophia nor fully Claire, living in a limbo between identities, too transformed to reclaim my past, too haunted to fully embrace my future. That night, standing before the bathroom mirror in my apartment, I made a decision. The blonde hair that had survived my transformation, Sophia's last physical remnant, had to go. I cut it short with kitchen scissors, the pale strands falling like snow around my feet. The box of black hair dye purchased weeks earlier finally served its purpose. The symbolism wasn't subtle, but it was necessary. A physical manifestation of my internal transformation. When I sent Akira my updated security badge photo the next morning, his response was immediate. "Now you look like someone who belongs in Tokyo." 2 years into my Tokyo life, during a routine security scan, an alert I'd set up on Carson Industries flagged unexpected news. Nicholas had announced expansion operations to Japan, scheduling a major press conference to launch a partnership with Tanaka Pharmaceuticals, one of Nakamura's chief competitors. The accompanying photo in the business journal showed Nicholas smiling broadly with his arm around Olivia, their poised perfection unchanged by time or conscience. Behind them stood Richard Anderson and his son, the man I was supposed to marry, alongside a young woman wearing my old signature pearl necklace. My replacement, positioned exactly where I once stood in countless similar photos. "They've replaced you completely," Yumiko observed, studying the image over my shoulder in our shared office. "Does that bother you?" Her question forced me to confront the hollow space where hurt should be. 2 years ago the sight would have devastated me. Now I felt only a cold, crystalline clarity. "No," I replied, closing the laptop with decisive finality. "But I think it's time they learned that secrets don't stay buried." That night, from my rain-spattered apartment balcony overlooking Tokyo's glittering expanse, I composed an encrypted email to David Mercer, the investigative journalist whose exposés on pharmaceutical industry corruption had earned him both a Pulitzer and powerful enemies. I offered what no other source could provide: insider knowledge of Nicholas Carson's darkest deeds, from the accident that killed my parents to the current exploitation of Asian medical patients. The final line of my message was simple: I died so that the truth could live. Are you interested in resurrection? His reply arrived within minutes. Tell me everything. David Mercer and I worked methodically over the next year, building a case so airtight that not even Nicholas's army of attorneys could dismantle it. Our communications remained encrypted, our meetings virtual. His investigative team in New York, me in Tokyo, both of us aware that electronic footprints could be traced by those with enough resources and motivation. The flash drive burned a hole in my pocket as I walked through Akira's towering office building on a crisp autumn morning. 3 years of methodical evidence gathering had culminated in this moment. My final meeting with Nakamura before setting our plan in motion. The weight of the tiny device seemed disproportionate to its size, its contents heavier than any physical burden I'd ever carried. Inside was everything: financial records proving Nicholas had embezzled from his own company through shell corporations in the Cayman Islands, documentation of his involvement in my biological parents' accident, including payments to the mechanic who'd tampered with their brakes, testimony from other victims of his ruthless business tactics, carefully gathered through David's network of sources. I'd become something of a corporate spy over the past 3 years, utilizing my position in Akira's security firm to build skills in digital intelligence. What had begun as simple information sharing about Carson Industries' operations had evolved into sophisticated counterintelligence when Nicholas expanded into the Japanese market. Each time he attempted to undermine a Nakamura subsidiary or poach talent, I was there, anticipating his moves through knowledge of his tactical playbook. Akira's office occupied the entire top floor, its glass walls offering a panoramic view of Tokyo's skyline. He stood with his back to the door, hands clasped behind him as he contemplated the city spread below like a living circuit board. "You're certain about this course?" he asked without turning, having sensed my presence. "Once initiated, it cannot be reversed." I placed the flash drive on his immaculate desk. "This contains copies of everything we've gathered. David has the originals, secured in multiple locations." He finally turned, studying me with the penetrating gaze that had unnerved business rivals for decades. "You understand what happens if you do this?" His normally impassive face showed something I'd never seen there before: concern. "Nicholas Carson isn't just your stepfather. He's connected to powerful people who protect their own. The congressman he supported for 20 years now chairs the Financial Oversight Committee. The judge who plays golf with him every Sunday has jurisdiction over corporate cases in Massachusetts." I nodded, the weight of my decision settling firmly on my shoulders. I died once because of his secrets. I won't die again. For the first time in our complicated relationship, Akira placed a paternal hand on my shoulder. "Then I will ensure you have what you need. My security team will accompany you to America." Remote but present. Back in my apartment, the transformation was already underway. Living room walls disappeared beneath a strategic map of connections, timelines, and vulnerabilities. Red string connecting photographs, documents, and newspaper clippings like a crimson web of corruption. 3 years of investigation had revealed the true extent of Nicholas's empire and its rotten foundation. But he'd built layers of protection around himself through political donations, strategic marriages between associates' children, and meticulously buried evidence. The map illustrated these defenses in concentric circles, each one representing a barrier we would need to breach. David Mercer's face appeared on my secure laptop screen that evening, his expression grave. Despite his reputation for exposing corporate corruption, even he seemed daunted by the scope of Nicholas's influence. "Going public isn't enough," he warned, running a hand through his prematurely gray hair. "I've seen this before. People like him survive scandals through expensive lawyers and convenient scapegoats. Some mid-level executive takes the fall, pays a fine that amounts to pocket change, and business continues with barely a hiccup. That's why the memorial service is key," I explained, pointing to the invitation I'd obtained through careful manipulation of the funeral home's database. "Everything we've gathered becomes exponentially more powerful when delivered at the moment he's performing his greatest lie." David nodded slowly. "Theatrical certainly, but also dangerous. You'll be walking into the lion's den with a target on your back." "He won't recognize me," I assured him, though though the slight tremble in my voice betrayed my own uncertainty. No one will until I choose to reveal myself. He was right about one thing. Public humiliation alone wouldn't satisfy the debt Nicholas owed, not just to me but to my real parents and countless others he'd destroyed. True justice required something more personal, more devastating. Watching his carefully constructed world crumble while looking into the eyes of the daughter he'd discarded. The notification appeared on my phone 2 months later during a late-night coding session. An obituary posted in my hometown newspaper. Memorial service announced for Sophia Carson, beloved daughter of Nicholas and Olivia Carson, on the 3rd anniversary of her passing. My hands trembled as I read the flowery language describing a daughter, taken too soon, and parents, still grieving their tremendous loss. The audacity was breathtaking. Nicholas and Olivia positioning themselves as bereaved parents when they'd orchestrated my destruction. More importantly, this presented the opportunity I'd been waiting for. Every important business associate, every politician in Nicholas's pocket, every family friend who believed his lies would gather in one place to maintain the fiction of Sophia Carson's tragic suicide. The perfect audience for the truth. Creating Claire Bennett had been about survival, but what I needed now was someone unmemorable, someone who could slip through security and blend into a crowd of mourners. I spent weeks crafting this final disguise. Subtle makeup techniques to soften my already altered features, brown contact lenses to replace my distinctive blue-gray eyes, unremarkable clothing expensive enough to belong but not stand out. Hours in front of my bathroom mirror were devoted to practicing expressions I'd never naturally wear. Sympathetic nods, the appropriately solemn downturn of lips at a memorial service, the slightly uncomfortable posture of a distant business associate paying respects rather than a daughter returning from the dead. Yumiko, who'd become my closest confidant over the past 3 years, watched with growing concern as I obsessively refined these details. One evening, as I practiced altering my distinctive gait to something more subdued, she finally voiced what must have been building for months. "What happens after?" she asked, perched on the edge of my couch, surrounded by the evidence web that had consumed my living space. I paused mid-step, confused by the question. "After what?" "After you've exposed him and burned down everything he's built. What then? Who will Claire Bennett become when she no longer needs to destroy Nicholas Carson?" The question caught me off guard, a blind spot in my meticulous planning. For 3 years, vengeance had been my North Star, my purpose, the framework around which I'd built my new existence. I had planned every detail of my revenge but nothing beyond it. "I haven't thought that far ahead," I admitted, the realization unsettling. Yumiko's expression softened with rare vulnerability. "Perhaps you should. Revenge is a powerful fuel, but it burns quickly and leaves nothing behind but ash. You've built something here. Skills, connections, a life. Don't sacrifice your future for his past." Her words haunted me in the weeks that followed as preparations accelerated. Akira's team secured my travel documentation, ensuring Claire Bennett could enter the United States without raising flags in any system Nicholas might monitor. David's associates arranged secure transportation from the airport to a safe house outside Boston. 2 weeks before the memorial, I received an unexpected email that pierced through my tactical focus. It came from Megan, my old friend who'd sheltered me briefly before my escape to Tokyo, who'd believed the story of my suicide because there had been no alternative explanation for my disappearance. She'd sent it to my old account, which I still monitored through an encrypted connection. "I don't know why I'm writing to you. Maybe just to say I never believed what they said about you. Nicholas has been acting strange about this memorial, insisting on a closed casket even though there's nothing to bury. Sometimes I wonder if you're still out there somewhere." Her words solidified my resolve while simultaneously reminding me that Nicholas's deception had claimed more victims than just me. There were people like Megan who deserved the truth as much as Nicholas deserved exposure. I booked a flight to America under my Claire Bennett identity, arranged for David to be ready with his editorial team, and spent one final night looking out over Tokyo's glittering skyline. The city that had once seemed so alien had become home, reshaping me as I learned to navigate its complexities. Standing on my balcony watching raindrops race down the glass barrier, I realized Tokyo hadn't just provided shelter. It had rebuilt me cell by cell into someone capable of justice rather than revenge. The distinction was subtle but critical. In the reflection of the rain-streaked glass, I caught glimpses of both women I'd been. Sophia's determined eyes set in Claire's reconstructed face. As lightning briefly illuminated the sky, I made a silent promise to the hybrid woman who stared back at me. After the funeral, after Nicholas faced the consequences of his actions, Claire Bennett would be free to truly live. The architect of vengeance had designed a perfect plan for destruction. Now it was time to execute it. The 13-hour flight from Tokyo to Boston left me with too much time to doubt my plan. Each minute in that pressurized cabin felt like another opportunity for my resolve to leak away. I'd rehearsed this confrontation countless times in my mind, but now that it was imminent, unexpected emotions surfaced. Not just determination, but a profound grief for the family I'd once believed was mine. Morning broke over Boston with a fitting dramaturgy. Rain poured from leaden skies as my taxi approached the Carson family church. Its Gothic spires stark against storm clouds like accusing fingers pointed heavenward. How appropriate that even the weather seemed to mourn the fictional tragedy Nicholas had created. The driver commented on the nasty day for a memorial, unaware of the true storm about to break inside those hallowed walls. I paid in cash and stepped onto the rain-slick sidewalk, my sensible heels already an unfamiliar sensation after years of Tokyo's fashion. The black umbrella concealed my face as I joined the stream of somber attendees, most wearing expressions of practiced sadness that never quite reached their eyes. These were Nicholas's people. Business associates, political connections, social climbers, all performing the expected role of mourners. Security guards checked invitations at the door, an unusual precaution for a memorial service, but entirely in character for Nicholas's pathological need for control. My pulse quickened as I approached, the forged invitation Akira had arranged feeling suddenly flimsy in my gloved hand. The guard barely glanced at it before nodding me through, more concerned with keeping out journalists than scrutinizing mourners. I slipped into the back row of the ornate sanctuary, heart thundering against my ribs. The church smelled of rain-dampened wool, expensive perfume, and the cloying sweetness of far too many flowers. At the front stood a glossy white casket flanked by enormous arrangements of white lilies. My favorite flowers once upon a time, a detail Nicholas had remembered for this theatrical production. The irony of an empty coffin waiting for a living woman wasn't lost on me. The organist played a somber Bach piece I recognized from countless Sunday services in this very church, where I'd sat dutifully between Nicholas and Olivia, the perfect family in their regular pew. Today that front row was occupied by the architects of my destruction. Nicholas and Olivia held court, accepting condolences with dignified nods that conveyed appropriate grief without the messiness of actual emotion. My stepfather had aged visibly in 3 years, new lines etching his face like cracks in a foundation, his once perfect posture showing the slightest hint of a stoop. Olivia clung to his arm, her knuckles white against his black suit, her face a careful mask of sorrow that didn't quite disguise the fear in her eyes. Strategically positioned throughout the church were Carson Industries executives, local politicians whose campaigns Nicholas had funded, and society figures whose approval he'd always craved. I recognized faces from childhood galas, board meetings, and charity functions, people who had watched me grow up without ever really seeing me. In the second row sat Richard Anderson and his son, my once intended husband, the merger that never happened. Beside them was an elegant young woman wearing my mother's pearl earrings, her hand resting possessively on the younger Anderson's arm. They'd not only erased me but replaced me entirely, the corporate alliance proceeding with a different pawn. As the service began, a minister who'd never met me spoke about a troubled young soul finding peace, while a slideshow displayed carefully curated photographs of Sophia Carson's life. Ballet recitals at age 6. Graduation from Princeton. The Carson family yacht in St. Tropez. A perfect narrative that conveniently ended before I could ruin Nicholas's plans. No mention of adoption, no hint of my biological parents, no acknowledgement of the truth. I watched faces in the congregation as they gazed at these images, some genuinely sad, others merely performing the expected response, a few checking watches or phones when they thought no one was looking. How many suspected the truth? How many had been complicit in Nicholas's schemes over the years? The moment of reckoning approached as Nicholas himself rose to address the gathering, straightening his tie in that characteristic gesture I'd seen thousands of times. He moved to the pulpit with the confidence of a man who believed himself untouchable, surveying his assembled audience before beginning his performance. My daughter was everything to me, he began, his voice breaking with well-rehearsed emotion. Not a day passes that I don't wonder if I could have saved her from herself. Each word sent ice through my veins. The sheer calculation behind his performance, using my suicide to absolve himself of responsibility, ignited something molten within me. This wasn't just a lie. It was a complete inversion of truth, painting himself as the grieving father rather than the architect of my destruction. As he continued spinning his fabrication, describing a troubled daughter's spiral into depression rather than his own murderous schemes, I slowly removed my dark glasses. The wig followed, my tow-black hair falling free around my reconstructed face. My movements were deliberate and calm despite the storm raging inside. A woman to my right noticed first, her sharp intake of breath drawing the attention of others nearby. I stood, no longer concerned with concealment. David's team would be outside by now, photographers and reporters positioned as we'd planned. Nicholas faltered mid-sentence as our eyes met across the church, his practiced eulogy dying on his lips. Recognition dawned slowly in his eyes, confusion giving way to disbelief as I walked steadily toward the center aisle. The soft murmur of confused whispers rose around me like gathering wind before a hurricane. "Miss me?" I asked, my voice carrying in the sudden silence. Gasps rippled through the congregation as I moved toward the casket, each step measured and purposeful on the marble floor. The click of my heels echoed in the stunned quiet. "Quite a turnout for my funeral," I continued, reaching the white coffin and running my fingers along its polished surface. Shame about the empty coffin. Nicholas's face drained of color, his carefully constructed mask slipping to reveal naked panic. Olivia swayed beside him, clutching the pew for support, her horror suggesting she hadn't known the extent of his deception. "This is impossible," Nicholas managed, his voice stripped of its usual authority. "You died. There were death certificates, medical reports." I smiled, the expression feeling foreign on my reconstructed face. "You taught me well about falsifying documents, didn't you? Just like you did with my parents' accident report." Murmurs swept through the crowd as I reached into my purse, withdrawing the USB drive containing 3 years of meticulously gathered evidence. "Everyone here deserves to know exactly who they're mourning with today," I announced, turning to face the congregation. "Not Sophia Carson, troubled suicide victim, but the daughter of James and Elizabeth Reed, murdered by Nicholas Carson to prevent them from exposing his first financial fraud." The sanctuary erupted in shocked exclamations. Several executives from Carson Industries immediately rose, moving toward exits only to find them blocked by members of David's team, who had slipped in during the commotion. "This is absurd," Nicholas shouted, struggling to regain control of the situation. "This woman is clearly disturbed." "Dini doesn't lie, Nicholas," I cut in. "Tests confirming my identity as Elizabeth Reed's daughter are included in the evidence package already being distributed to federal investigators and select journalists." Chaos erupted as security guards moved toward me, only to be blocked by David and his team entering through the side doors, cameras recording every moment. The flash of photography punctuated the growing disorder like lightning in a gathering storm. "Nicholas Carson," David announced, his clear voice cutting through the tumult. "We have questions regarding your involvement in the deaths of James and Elizabeth Reed in 2001, financial improprieties at Carson Industries, and the attempted murder of their daughter, who is very much alive." The congregation dissolved into shocked conversations and hurried exits as Nicholas lunged toward me, his composed facade completely shattered. His face contorted with a rage I'd glimpsed only once before, the night he'd struck me at the dinner table. "You ungrateful little," he hissed, hands outstretched as if to finish what Vincent had started years ago. Before he could reach me, Richard Anderson, surprisingly, stepped between us, his substantial frame blocking Nicholas's advance. "That's enough, Nick," he said firmly, his voice carrying the authority of decades in corporate boardrooms. He turned to stare at my face, his eyes widening with shock and dawning recognition. "My God, it really is you, Elizabeth's daughter," he whispered. "Those eyes. Exactly like James's." In that moment of recognition from my mother's old friend, everything clicked into place. Richard hadn't known about Nicholas's darker deeds. The confusion and horror in his expression told me Nicholas had manipulated him just as he had manipulated everyone else. "Your parents were my closest friends," Richard continued, voice thick with emotion. Nicholas told me they designated him as your guardian, that their will was forged. I finished for him. Just like the accident report, just like my death certificate. Outside, police sirens wailed, drawing closer to the church as years of buried secrets finally rose to the surface. Nicholas's expression shifted from rage to calculation, his mind already working on escape routes, explanations, ways to twist this new reality to his advantage. You won't survive this, he said quietly for my ears alone. You have no idea what forces you're dealing with. I stepped closer, close enough to see the pulse jumping in his throat, to smell the familiar sandalwood cologne that had once represented safety but now only triggered memories of betrayal. Neither do you, I replied, my voice steady. The difference is I've already died once. I have nothing left to lose. The church doors burst open as police officers entered, their purposeful strides echoing through the now chaotic sanctuary. In their lead was Detective Marcus Rivera, whom David had carefully selected for his incorruptible reputation and whose financial crimes unit had been building their own case against Carson Industries for months. Nicholas Carson, Rivera announced, "We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of securities fraud, conspiracy, and suspicion of murder." As the officers approached, Nicholas's eyes never left mine, his expression transforming from shock to something I'd never seen there before: fear. "You're dead to us," he had told me 3 years ago. Now, as handcuffs closed around his wrists, I saw the truth dawn in his eyes. It wasn't Sophia Carson who had died that day in his study. It was Nicholas Carson who was dead now, his empire of lies crumbling around him in the very church where he'd staged my funeral. The handcuffs closed around Nicholas's wrists with a finality that should have brought me satisfaction. Instead, watching him being led from the church between 2 officers, I felt oddly hollow. 3 years of focused rage had crystallized into this moment, yet victory tasted nothing like I'd imagined. Chaos swirled around me, reporters shouting questions, mourners fleeing the scandal, David's team documenting everything. I stood motionless at the center of the storm, still processing the reality that my carefully orchestrated plan had actually succeeded. "You need to get somewhere safe," David murmured, appearing at my elbow. "This is just the beginning. The media frenzy will be relentless." Megan materialized through the crowd, her practical nature asserting itself amid the chaos. "My guest room is ready," she said simply, linking her arm through mine. "Let's go." The federal investigation moved with surprising speed once the evidence was public. Nicholas faced charges ranging from financial fraud to conspiracy in my parents' deaths, while Olivia negotiated immunity in exchange for testimony about years of covering up his crimes. I watched their carefully constructed world implode from the safety of Megan's modest apartment, the same refuge I'd sought before fleeing to Tokyo. News vans camped outside the Carson estate captured footage of agents removing boxes of documents while Nicholas's former business associates scrambled to distance themselves from the scandal. Overnight, invitations to Carson galas became toxic, political donations were returned, and board members resigned citing personal reasons. The house of cards Nicholas had built through decades of manipulation collapsed with breathtaking speed. 3 days after the memorial service, Richard Anderson requested a meeting. We met in a private room at his attorney's office, neutral territory for a conversation heavy with history. "I've been trying to reconcile the Nicholas I thought I knew with the man revealed in those documents," he began, looking older than his 60 years. "We were partners for 30 years. I trusted him with everything, including my son's future." His hands trembled slightly as he placed a leather-bound photo album on the table between us. "I thought you might want these. Your parents, your real parents at happier times." Inside were photographs I'd never seen. My mother laughing on a sailboat, her hair wild in the wind. My father presenting research at a conference, pride evident in his posture. The 3 of us at what must have been my christening, my parents beaming at the tiny bundle in their arms. A life I couldn't remember, but that should have been mine. "They were brilliant, both of them," Richard said, his voice thick with memory. "James was developing a breakthrough cardiac medication when they died. Elizabeth had this uncanny ability to see through financial smokescreens. They would have changed the world." He looked up, his eyes flickering over my altered features. "Your mother would be proud of your courage. You have her spirit, something Nicholas could never erase no matter how hard he tried." The album became my most precious possession. a tangible link to the truth I'd been denied. Reclaiming my legal identity proved complex after years of existing as Claire Bennett. The attorney who helped me navigate this limbo, a specialist in identity law recommended by David, looked perpetually baffled by the unprecedented nature of my situation. Legally speaking, you died 3 years ago, she explained during our first consultation, surrounded by towers of documents. We're essentially resurrecting you. The process involved DNA tests confirming my relation to my biological parents, untangling Nicholas's deliberate legal knots, and court appearances where I testified about the circumstances leading to my death. Bank accounts had to be unfrozen, death certificates invalidated, insurance payments reclaimed. Each bureaucratic hurdle required explaining my extraordinary circumstances to increasingly wide-eyed government officials. Eventually, the complexity of my case reached the desk of Judge Elena Ramirez, who took personal interest in resolving the tangled legal web. When she finally signed the order restoring my identity after months of proceedings, she offered rare words of compassion from the bench. Ms. Reed Carson, the court recognizes the extraordinary measures you were forced to take for your own survival. Your legal identity is restored, but I recognize that identity itself is more than documents and names. That part of your journey continues beyond these walls. The hyphenated surname had been my choice. Reed to honor my biological parents, Carson because despite everything those years had shaped me too. Erasing them completely felt like another kind of death. As spring turned to summer, I found myself increasingly restless in Boston. The media attention around the Carson scandal gradually subsided as newer outrages took its place. Nicholas awaited trial from a federal detention center, denied bail due to flight risk. Olivia had retreated to a sister's home in Connecticut, leaving the Carson estate to languish under the weight of impending asset forfeiture. I'd accomplished what I'd returned for, yet something was missing. Tokyo pulled at me like a distant tide. I'd built something real there, skills, friendships, purpose, that had nothing to do with Nicholas or my past. You don't have to stay, Megan observed one evening, finding me staring at the Tokyo weather forecast on my laptop. Your testimony is recorded. The prosecutors have everything they need. Her perception startled me. It feels wrong somehow to just leave. Wrong for whom? You've done what you came to do. The rest is just watching punishment unfold. She settled beside me on the couch. That's not reclamation, Sophia. That's still giving Nicholas power over your choices. Her words resonated with uncomfortable truth. I'd defined myself in opposition to Nicholas for so long that moving beyond revenge required conscious effort. After settling my affairs in America, including establishing a foundation for corporate whistleblowers using funds from the settlement with Carson Industries, I booked a one-way ticket to Tokyo. The night before my departure, I visited the cemetery where my biological parents were buried, placing white lilies on their long-neglected graves. I found the truth, I whispered to the marble headstones. I hope that brings you peace. The familiar neon glow of Shibuya welcomed me home as rain washed the streets clean, the humidity wrapping around me like an embrace after Boston's drier climate. Yumiko met me at the airport, her usual reserve breaking into a genuine smile when she spotted me among the arriving passengers. So who arrives today, Sophia or Claire? She asked as we claimed my luggage, her question cutting to the heart of my ongoing identity reconciliation. I considered the question seriously, feeling the weight of both identities and the freedom of choosing between them. The woman who had boarded the plane in Boston was legally Sophia Reed Carson, but 3 years as Claire Bennett had left indelible marks on my personality, outlook, and capabilities. Just me, I finally answered, still figuring out exactly who that is. Her laughter was warm with understanding. Very zen. You're becoming Japanese after all. Returning to the Nakamura offices felt like closing a circle. Akira received me in his minimalist office, MT Fuji visible through floor-to-ceiling windows behind him. Your actions in Boston have created significant opportunities, he said without preamble. Carson Industries' collapse has left market vacuums in several sectors. I'd expected this conversation. The transactional assessment of how my revenge had benefited his business interests. What I hadn't expected was his next statement. However, I find myself more interested in your future than in Nicholas Carson's past. Akira offered me a partnership rather than my old position. recognizing that my experience made me uniquely qualified to help other victims of corporate corruption. Your perspective crosses cultures and understands both sides of power, he explained, gesturing toward Tokyo's sprawling skyline. That is rare and valuable. My first client was a young executive whistleblower facing retaliation from a pharmaceutical company, circumstances eerily similar to what my biological parents had experienced. Meeting her in a secure location outside Tokyo, I recognized the fear in her eyes, the same terror I'd felt when realizing the extent of Nicholas's betrayal. Guiding her through protection protocols and evidence preservation, I found purpose in translating my trauma into practical wisdom. They think they've already won because they have more resources and influence, I told her as we developed her strategy. That's their vulnerability, underestimating what someone with truth on their side can accomplish. My dual identity became my greatest asset. Sophia Reed Carson understood American corporate culture and legal systems. Claire Bennett knew how to disappear, rebuild, and navigate Asian business protocols. Together, they formed a uniquely qualified advisor for those fighting powerful adversaries. On the anniversary of the memorial service confrontation, I stood on my apartment balcony watching lightning illuminate Tokyo's rainy season skies. An email had arrived earlier from Megan with updates on Nicholas's case. Guilty pleas on most charges, sentencing scheduled for next month, and pictures of the for sale sign outside the Carson estate. The dynasty built on secrets and corruption was ending not with dramatic destruction but with quiet dismantling, piece by piece. I should have felt triumphant, but instead found myself contemplating the cost of the past 3 years. The person I might have been without Nicholas's betrayal, the experiences lost and gained through becoming someone else. As thunder rolled across the city, I made peace with the complicated truth. Nicholas had tried to kill me, but in forcing me to rebuild myself completely, he had inadvertently given me something genuine. A life truly my own, forged through fire and entirely on my terms. I lifted my teacup in a silent toast to the storm, to Tokyo, to the woman I'd become. Neither Sophia Carson nor Claire Bennett, but something stronger created from both. Raindrops raced down the glass barrier of my balcony, Tokyo's lights refracting through each droplet into miniature galaxies of possibility. The past was settled. The future finally was mine alone to define.